Congratulatory notification appeared and it was announced that he'd beaten it. Clenching his fist, the protagonist shouted that yes, finally, he'd beaten it. He raised both hands and declared that he'd finally finished that damn game, and almost instantly comments from viewers began pouring in. On screen, the knight raised his sword as the announcement echoed that the game, famous for its nearly impassable difficulty, was Empire Defense. And now, 10 years after its release, someone had finally beaten it. That person was him. His chair slid back as he spoke to them all. Smiling broadly, the protagonist said that no matter how difficult a game was, it existed to be beaten, making it clear he was a gaming streamer. His webcam feed appeared, and it was said that he only took on the most difficult games. His channel profile popped up, and even his nickname sounded like something straight out of a classic nerd stereotype. Sitting at the table, the protagonist thanked someone for the $200 donation, quickly adding that no, it was all thanks to them. They really did a great job. It was said again that he was the first person to beat this absurdly difficult game in its 10 years of existence. Closing his eyes, the protagonist said that honestly, his techniques weren't anything special. No, they were just damn cool. He looked up in surprise, thinking that every gamer dreams of beating an impossible game. But if there was one thing they regretted, a user comment suddenly appeared. The protagonist stared ahead in silence. The game's final scene played. It was said that maybe because the audience had grown attached to the characters, they'd hoped everyone would survive the final battle. But in the end, everyone except the main character, Lucas, had died. Watching the monitor, the protagonist reflected that his goal was to finish the game anyway, not save everyone. Game notifications continued to appear, and a thought crossed his mind. After the final boss, the Princess of the Lake, unable to sleep, the game ended, but Lucas didn't move an inch. Corpses littered the floor as if frozen in the moment after the boss had fallen, surrounded by the bodies of allies and enemies alike. The protagonist sat silently at the table, wondering why this was happening. A man from the game appeared, and it occurred to him that even if he was just a character, his back looked unbearably sad. Slowly, the figure began to fade. The game credits rolled. Looking at the monitor, the protagonist thought that things were better now. Suddenly, he winced as a message appeared asking whether the developer shouldn't reward him somehow. Grinning, the protagonist asked why. The viewer replied that their studio had literally been destroyed because of an unbeatable game, but he'd proven otherwise. At the very least, they should thank him. The computer sat on the table as a voice chimed in saying, "Oh, come on. He was just playing for fun." Holding his hand out, the protagonist said he didn't need any reward. As long as he could have fun with them, that was enough. More comments flooded in. Waving his hand, the hero said no, then suddenly thought about how Mr. A had disappeared years ago. The game disc lay on the table, and the protagonist thought that in those 10 years he hadn't created anything. Closing his eyes, the protagonist thought he didn't care if someone had beaten his game. Suddenly, a notification from the game director appeared. The protagonist winced as he stared at the monitor. His eyes widened and he exclaimed out loud. He froze in bewilderment as an overwhelming wave of comments poured in. His gaze locked onto the message as he read it. First, the director thanked him. He said he'd already given up hope that anyone would ever beat his game and wondered if what he was seeing was even real. Hearing that, the protagonist smiled. Seeing how he handled it made him feel relieved all over again. "Thank you very much," the message said. The protagonist replied that there was no need to thank him. Sitting at the computer, the hero heard someone say they were glad they still had hope, and he thought that maybe they were planning something like a second Empire Defense. Looking at the monitor, he heard another message saying he'd proven his abilities and worth, and that he should come help them. The protagonist asked again, eyes widening as he wondered if this was just someone trying to get attention. Game developer would never sit in his stream. He should probably just kick them. Smiling, the hero asked about Mr. A, or rather, the self-proclaimed Mr. A. Suddenly, another notification appeared on the monitor. The protagonist closed his eyes and said that was exactly what he'd been saying. Then, all at once, his head began to spin. He wondered what was happening as his body tilted to the side. Had he been playing too much, his vision blurred. He muttered that he hoped his viewers would call an ambulance if they saw him faint. A notification appeared thanking him. Spheres rolled along the ground. The hero suddenly came to. He shot upright and screamed. Looking straight ahead, the protagonist wondered what that sound was. Debris flew toward him. He looked up in fear and shouted, asking what the hell was going on. Covering his head with his hands, he braced himself against the ground. Gritting his teeth, the protagonist cried out. Smoke poured from a cannon. Putting a hand to his face, he realized it was the smell of gunpowder. The fuse ignited. A deafening shot rang out. The hero turned away in fear, frozen in disbelief. A shell landed right next to him. Frowning, the protagonist shouted, "What the hell? Let them finish this already." Then his eyes widened in shock. Flags were raised into the air. Knight stood at attention. Sitting on the battlefield, the protagonist heard a voice shout, "Hurry, don't let them get there." He froze again, completely bewildered. Sitting on the ground, the hero wondered what the hell was going on. Soldiers fired their weapons. A knight clenched his teeth. Watching them, the protagonist realized this was war. A man looked to the side and shouted something, then rushed forward and turned back. The protagonist looked at him questioningly. The knight frowned and shouted that he was fine. The hero's eyes widened. He thought it was an enemy soldier. Stretching his hand out, the protagonist shouted for him to back off. The knight took a step closer. The protagonist stared at him. Utterly bewildered, the sword fell to the ground as the soldier bowed deeply. He begged for forgiveness, breaking down in tears as he pleaded for mercy for his insignificant life. Watching him, the hero wondered what was wrong with this old man. The protagonist slowly rose, stretching his hand forward as he addressed the knight, telling him to calm down first as fear visibly rushed through him. Suddenly, his eyes widened in terror. An explosion thundered right in front of him. The hero was thrown to the ground, clenching his teeth as pain shot through his body. He cleared his throat, eyes wide, frowning as he wondered what the hell that was. Bomb! At that moment, a glow appeared near his hand. A green flame burst out in front of him. Staring at it in confusion, the protagonist muttered, "What the hell?" The man stepped forward and shouted, asking what that was. Stretching his hand out, the soldier yelled that the enemy was attacking. The hero looked away in disbelief as an infantryman screamed for them to stop the enemies from climbing the wall. With a loud cry, a man rushed forward. There was a sharp swing of a weapon. His eyes widened. The blow landed directly on a soldier. The protagonist stared in shock as the man was pierced by a claw. A severed hand bounced across the ground, blood splattering in front of the hero. He lowered his head slowly. The hand lay right before him. The claws continued tearing into the soldiers. Frowning, the protagonist watched, wondering what the hell was hiding behind the wall. Then the monster's eyes lit up. Its legs emerged. A massive spider stood before him, a bright light pouring from its eyes. Suddenly, the creature screeched furiously, its teeth grinding together. The hero realized it really was a spider. A soldier rushed forward, shouting that the army had arrived, yelling for them to immobilize it. The spider lashed out at the knights. Sitting on the ground, the protagonist stared, his mouth open, his entire body trembling with fear. The spider took another step forward. Wide-eyed, the protagonist wondered if he was dreaming or hallucinating. Staring at the monster, he muttered that this was impossible. Its massive paw rose, and the thought crossed his mind that he shouldn't let it touch him. Suddenly, the monster swung. The hero looked up in fear, thinking it would be a pathetic way to die. Then something changed. Looking at the creature, the boy transformed. Gripping the weapon in his hands, he muttered that denying reality was impossible. Bright light enveloped the sword, his eyes glowing as he swung. The blade struck. The spider was sliced clean in half. A knight stared at the hero and grinned, asking if that wasn't a little cliché. The protagonist shouted in shock, his eyes wide. Sitting in front of him, the knight asked why he was making that face. The boy looked at him anxiously and asked if he was wounded. The protagonist stared at the knight's face, thinking it looked strangely familiar. A game character stood before him. Holding out his finger, the hero asked about Lucas. The young man looked stunned and said he knew it. Closing his eyes, he added that the hero must have injured his head badly. Standing there, the protagonist heard him say that he was genuinely happy the hero had started calling him by name. Despite guarding him his entire life, he still couldn't remember it. The protagonist froze. The boy stared at him silently, and the hero wondered, was this really Lucas? He couldn't understand what any of this meant. Turning away, he told himself it couldn't be real. Then he froze. They were standing on the wall. Monsters were charging toward the fortress. Projectiles flew at spiders, and suddenly he heard the unmistakable sound of being transported into Empire defense. The protagonist trembled, thinking he was done for. The game's intro appeared, declaring it the game with the highest difficulty when he had just completed before arriving here. The monster's eyes glowed as they advanced, and he realized the game was nothing but endless carnage. Countless powerful monsters surged forward. Staring in horror, the protagonist thought he had landed in pure hell. Slime spewed from the creatures, spheres flew through the air, projectiles slammed into towers, an explosion erupted in front of him. Frowning, he wondered why he was inside the game at all. Standing beside him, Lucas grabbed his shoulder and explained that the enemy advancing toward them was an army of black spiders. They were closing in on the gates. He added that the forward operating base was on the verge of collapse, but these spiders became inactive at sunset. The sun peeked out from behind the mountains. Lucas said sunset would arrive in 30 minutes. Gripping his sword, he stepped forward, saying that was why they had to hold out. Standing between the monsters and the wall, he said they needed to do everything possible to endure until then. Watching him, the hero wondered why Lucas was trying so desperately to protect him. They called him Your Imperial Highness. Who was he really? Black smoke filled the air. Lucas sheathed his sword. Someone shouted that he was still breathing and called for a stretcher. Closing his eyes, Lucas said sunset had finally arrived and the black spider army began to retreat. Turning back to the hero, Lucas looked straight at him. The protagonist lowered his gaze in silence. Spider corpses lay scattered, pierced by arrows. Looking to the side, Ash asked where they were. Lucas replied that it was February 28, 649 according to the imperial calendar, and that this was the forward operating base of Crossroad, a fortress city. Gritting his teeth, the hero said that meant tomorrow would be March 1, 649. Lucas confirmed it. Looking down, the protagonist muttered that March 1, 649, this monster forward operating base, was a painfully familiar situation. Biting his lip, he added that it was a painfully familiar place. The towers came into view, and he realized that during the 6 months he'd spent playing Empire Defense, this exact time and place marked the beginning of the tutorial he'd repeated hundreds of times. Frowning, the prince shouted, then turned to the boy and declared that his name was Ash von Hyder Everblack. The hero clutched his head as he heard how accurate it was. He asked why, then immediately thought, why this bastard? The man stood holding a flag, and it was said that he was the insane third prince of the empire, the worst commander, responsible for the deaths of most of the soldiers in the fortress city. His corpse appeared, and the realization hit him that this was the character who met the worst possible end in the tutorial. Gritting his teeth, the protagonist thought, why did this bastard have to be me? The commander's exclusive dormitory appeared. Staring at his reflection, Ash shouted that he was a stupid idiot. He should have just quietly holed up in the fortress city. Why the hell did he even come out? Pressing a hand to his head, he muttered that he was going to go crazy. The game's intro appeared, and the hero thought that this really was a typical Empire Defense game, the reason it was infamous for its monstrous difficulty. Difficulty levels appeared, stating that the highest difficulty was Hell, combined with Ironman mode, which forcibly saved progress. The final scene surfaced in his mind, and he realized the reason. Ironman Hell difficulty, a combination of both. He was the only person who had ever completed that mode. No matter where the game sent him, he was confident he could find a way out, except for this damn tutorial. Frowning, the hero opened the system window and immediately realized the stage was impossible to clear. People stood atop a tower, and it hit him that the tutorial was designed so he would fail no matter what, because the story begins with Lucas escaping alone from the invading monsters. The creatures appeared, and it was explained that in this 3-year game, the Black Spider Army were monsters meant to be hunted only after reaching the middle of the 2nd year. So why the hell was he expected to defeat hundreds of them at the very start? Closing his eyes, the hero muttered, "No focus, classic nerd." Looking straight ahead, he reminded himself that he had already beaten this game. Raising his hands, he thought that if he combined his knowledge and experience, he could definitely find a way out. Then he smiled. There was none. Looking at the notifications, Ash muttered, "FCKed, no." Frowning, he stared at the screen. What the hell was with these spiders' levels? Level 55, level 60, and there were over 1,000 of them. What the FCK? Looking at the artifact list, the hero noted that the castle wall's durability was at rock bottom, and the only usable asset was an ancient mana cannon rated Asura. With that alone, their odds of victory were practically non-existent. Sitting at the table, the protagonist told himself they needed a method with a higher chance of success. Calm down. Let's calm down. The difficulty icon appeared again, and he remembered that in Ironman mode, saving and loading were impossible. The moment he screwed up, the entire run would be ruined. That meant every single second required the optimal decision. Countless notifications appeared, reminding him that after spending half a year playing this game, he knew for a fact that no matter the situation, there was always a move to make and a way to survive. More messages poured in. Ash wondered if there was anything with even a slightly higher chance of survival. Looking away, he searched his memory for something just a bit more certain. He slowly extended his hand forward. Suddenly, his eyes widened. "I need to find it." Kicking the door open, the protagonist turned and shouted, "Lucas, where are you?" A voice replied that he was here. Turning toward him, Ash barked out an order, telling him to quickly gather the party under his direct command. Lucas looked at him in confusion and asked what he meant by party. Did he mean his guards? Raising an eyebrow, he added that Ash had never summoned them before. Why do it so suddenly? Ash snapped back, telling him to stop talking and hurry up and call them. Extending a finger, he smiled faintly and said he'd thought of a way to overcome the situation. A chair was pulled out. Crossing his arms, Ash asked if everyone was present. People stood around the room staring at him. They felt painfully familiar. Lily smiled. Ken clenched his teeth. Demian stared ahead in silence. Sitting at the table, the protagonist realized why they felt that way. Lucas stood still. It was said that Ash had seen them die countless times, but whatever. The girl looked aside, wondering why someone was curled up into a ball. Tears welled in the boy's eyes. Lily grinned and explained that he was like that because he'd lost a comrade today, asking for their understanding. It made sense. After all, he'd been like that throughout the entire tutorial. The player character appeared, and it was explained that because he started with an abnormal status condition, he was destined to die first. He remembered how useless he'd been even though he was the healer, the most important role in the game. Looking ahead, the hero began, "Well, for starters," sitting at the table, he added that he would explain everyone's roles tomorrow. Lily responded when she heard her name. Flames swirled around her, and it was explained that she was a fire-type mage, the main damage dealer of the team, capable of casting powerful spells one after another. She looked shocked when Ash said she would be their shield, blocking the spider's attacks as the main tank. Lily immediately objected, pointing out that she was a magician. The man frowned at the next name. A soldier gripping a sword stepped forward. It was explained that Ken was a shield knight capable of drawing aggro at the front line, using area of effect taunts to attract enemy attention and endure their attacks, in other words, a tank. The knight winced when he was told he would instead infiltrate the center of the enemy formation and cause chaos. He asked again, clearly confused. The boy remained seated on the floor as Demian's voice was heard. It was then recalled that, as mentioned before, he was a healer, an absolutely indispensable class in the game. The young man looked up when he heard that from now on he would serve as the team's sniper, tasked with eliminating the most important targets. Lucas frowned when he heard that he would instead command the remaining soldiers and maintain the front line. Watching them, the hero thought, "What the heck? Lucas, say something." Ken suddenly gritted his teeth in rage and slammed his fist down, shouting that this was bullshit. Frowning, he added that he was serious. Ash had dragged all of them into a dangerous situation because of a wrong command, and now he was saying things like this as if it were nothing. The protagonist stared at him in disbelief and thought, but it wasn't him. It was that Ash bastard. As the monsters drew closer to the gate, a realization struck him. Yes, this sounded insane. But this level couldn't be cleared by conventional means, which meant there was no other way to clear it than by being insane. Ash opened his mouth and turned toward Ken, realizing that he couldn't back down now. His eyes lit up as he spoke. "I am your Imperial Highness and your commander." Staring straight at Ken, the protagonist demanded to know why he was being disobedient. Lily lowered her head. Lucas froze. Demian's eyes widened. The knight flinched in fear. Ken stretched his hand forward and muttered something under his breath. The hero thought that this was it, that the man standing before him, that same crazed psycho, would eventually lose control and it would all be over. Ash rose slowly from his chair. Lily looked at him in confusion, the thought dawning on her that since his plan was nothing but reckless nonsense. The hero reached for his weapon. He swung his sword sharply. The blade slammed into the table. Everyone flinched. Demian trembled in fear. Lily froze, staring at the sword embedded before her. The room fell into deathly silence. Ash smiled calmly and asked if all of them had the ability to fulfill their assigned missions. Then he wondered if, since he was inhabiting the body of a psychopath, maybe he should act more like one. The others stared at him in silence, their brows furrowed. Ken thought the prince had completely lost his mind. Didn't he know how valuable a magician was? Ash lowered his gaze and added bitterly, "How are we supposed to go into battle with this guy leading us?" Suddenly, flames erupted around the weapon. Lily gasped in amazement. The others recoiled in shock. The protagonist grinned. Yes, that's it. Standing there, it occurred to him that maybe the developer had added it as a joke, but every character in the tutorial had hidden traits, special traits that completely contradicted their assigned roles. Turning to the mage, Ash asked Lily if she'd been cut by a blade when she was a child, back when a goblin horde invaded her village. Her eyes widened. He continued, saying that after that incident she'd acquired the trait Fire Skin. Notification appeared explaining that it was a trait born from extreme fear of sharp weapons. By turning her body into fire, she could dodge physical attacks. Every dodge consumed MP, but as long as she had sufficient mana, she could evade any physical strike. Standing before her, Ash asked if he was right. An image appeared explaining that this was a tank-type trait placed on the main damage dealer, something the game never allowed players to properly utilize. But this wasn't a game anymore. The sword pressed against her skin, and the thought occurred to him that he intended to use this trait to its absolute limit. Smiling broadly, the protagonist reflected that if the level was impossible to clear, then he had no choice but to use cheats. Looking straight ahead, he muttered that just like the bastard who'd thrown him into this world said, he would clear this shitty game, and when he did, he'd grab him by the collar and beat the hell out of him. Drawing his weapon back, Ash apologized for using such a rough method to prove his point. Lily quickly replied that it was fine, but asked how he even knew all this. Ash told her that wasn't what mattered right now. Now, he said, turning away. Smiling, the protagonist faced Ken. He told him that he used to be a petty thief as a kid. He was from the slums with too many mouths to feed, and becoming a knight must have been brutal. Ken reached forward in shock and demanded to know how he knew that. Holding the blade loosely, Ash replied that how he knew wasn't important. What mattered was what Ken could do with it. Notification appeared for the skill survival method of a petty thief. Looking straight at him, Ash said that meant he could become stealthy whenever he wanted, hide while avoiding attention entirely. Smiling coldly, the hero asked if he needed to make another example. Ken immediately bowed, shouting that he was right. Ash nodded and said that was good. In that case, Ken could handle his mission without issue. Placing the weapon back on the table, Ash finally turned toward Demian. Stepping closer, the hero thought that this boy was the most important piece of all. Grinning slightly, he asked if Demian had exceptionally good eyesight. Kneeling down, Ash said that was why he'd been able to vividly witness his friend's death. Demian lowered his gaze and explained that the boy had been his friend from his hometown. They'd grown up in the same orphanage. His voice shook. He said that in the middle of battle, that friend had sacrificed himself for him. Demian began to cry, asking why Ash had brought them here. What was his grand goal, or were their cheap lives nothing more than entertainment? Looking at him, the hero finally heard the question that mattered most. What was his purpose? The knight stared at them, listening as Demian cried out that their pathetic lives were nothing more than entertainment to him. Lucas stood frozen as he heard the boy scream, begging him to give Van back. Please give me back my friend, give him back. Lowering his head, Demian shouted for him to return him. Sunlight streamed down, illuminating a single flower. Protagonist grabbed the boy by the shoulder. Frowning, he spoke firmly. Demian could blame him, he could despise him if he wanted. But Van had waited until his final breath to save Demian's life. Was he really going to sit there and wait for death? Looking down, Ash continued. Demian was standing at death's door because of a trash commander. Was he really going to give up the life his friend had sacrificed himself for? He needed to resist with everything he had. Avenge him, kill the spiders, make it out alive, and then teach Ash a lesson. Squeezing the boy's shoulder, the hero asked if he wanted to kill those damn spiders. And then he asked if he wanted to kill him. Demian froze. Yes, he answered. The crowd flinched. Ash smiled broadly. Excellent. Raising a finger, he promised that if they made it out alive, Demian could be the one to take his life whenever that day came. Lucas frowned and turned toward him. Stretching his hand out to the side, Ash said that if the plan failed, they would all die anyway, and if that happened, Demian could kill him. He swore it on the honor of the imperial family. Just one day was enough, so please follow his orders. Demian looked up as he heard that. It occurred to him that sometimes hatred had to be used as fuel. Slowly, he lowered his head. Standing still, the protagonist thought that even if this was the case, looking down, he admitted that because of his critical failure in judgment, their army was nearly wiped out. A horde of monsters appeared, but he continued. If they followed his plan, they could push the spiders back. The chance was slim, but it existed. Just once, believe in him and follow his orders. Looking straight ahead, Ash asked them to trust him just this once, and in his mind he thought that finally his hand was complete. Lily frowned. Ken stared ahead with anger. Demian's gaze froze. Lucas looked resolutely at Ash, wondering whether this hand would be a royal straight, a flush, or complete garbage, but he had no choice but to go all in. The knight stood atop the wall. He had no choice but to bet everything. The soldier struck the drum. The black spider horde was approaching. The monster surged forward. Gritting his teeth, the knight asked if he would really be okay. Ash told him not to worry and to do exactly as he said. As the spiders rushed in, Ash declared that while the party bought time, they would locate the queen issuing the orders. A massive monster appeared and it became clear the queen was somewhere among them. Standing beside the cannon, the protagonist thought that they would blow the queen's head off with the ancient mana cannon. Fragments scattered across the ground. By removing the restraint, they had forcibly amplified its magic. This should be enough to injure even the queen. The problem was her location. A path toward the fortress appeared. The hero realized they needed to find the queen from so far away that she couldn't be seen with the naked eye. Was that even possible? Ash smiled. His skill map creation activated. A glow surrounded him. A blue wall spread throughout the fortress, expanding farther and farther. Sitting near a tree, Ash checked the notification. The ability allowed him to see the entire area in the form of a minimap. His stats appeared, and he recalled how shocked he'd been the first time he saw them. Ash level 1 Nasty Prince Ash von Heiter Everblack Novice Strength 1 Stamina 1 Agility 1 Magic Power 1 Intelligence 1 At least this skill had remained. Holding his hand out over the map, he thought, let's see, where are you hiding? If I can just find the boss mark. Suddenly, his eyes widened. There was no boss mark. The monster surged forward and realization hit him hard. The mission objective, the enemy's queen, wasn't on the map. Ken stood before the gate. Ash told him he'd gathered every stamina potion left in the stronghold. Ken needed to go outside and draw their attention. Did he think he could do it? Ken frowned, then said he could handle it. The view shifted. Lily trembled as Ash told her he was leaving her with a painful roll as well. If the spiders broke through to the artillery unit, she was to use fire skin to block the entrance. She swallowed and said she could do it. Lucas shouted for everyone to take formation. Knights raised their crossbows, cannons extended from behind the walls. Lucas gripped his weapon tightly and ordered them to endure. They would buy time until His Highness defeated the Queen. Turning his head, Lucas thought that dignified expression could only mean one thing. His Highness had finished all preparations. Ash's eyes widened. All right then. Let's stay calm. Suddenly, shots rang out from the towers. Shells tore through the air toward the monsters. Lucas raised his thumb. The protagonist looked at him and thought, okay, fine, he needs to stay calm. A marker suddenly appeared on the map, and it occurred to Ash that in the first place the goal of the tutorial wasn't to kill the boss monster. It would probably only appear once a full-scale attack began. They had a secure rear. Guards were stationed there in case anything happened. That was the only place the Queen could be. More markers appeared on the map. Ash turned to Demian and stretched his hand to the side, shouting that he could see spiders sitting around doing nothing. He thought it might be a possibility, but could this really be it? Pointing toward an empty field, Ash asked again. Demian stared straight ahead and answered yes. The Queen should be among them. Ash hesitated. He thought it might be possible, but was it really? Turning his head, he said that the Queen had to be there and that Demian would be able to find her. The boy stared forward. The creature's eyes lit up and he spoke hesitantly, describing a spider with the upper body of a human. Grinning broadly, the protagonist realized he'd caught the snaggletooth monster. Standing beside the cannon, Ash shouted that this was exactly it. Demian swallowed and asked if it wasn't a bit scary looking. Ash waved it off, saying there was nothing to be afraid of. It was about to get hit by a cannon and die anyway. The cannon swung to the side. An order rang out for the artillery unit to face southwest. Ash declared that Demian and he would take aim together. A soldier, eyes wide, announced that mana charging was complete and they could fire on command. Excellent. Turning his head, Ash said it was time to finish this. Demian's hands trembled as he turned away. He admitted he didn't have the confidence. He'd never done anything like this before, and to be made to do it so suddenly, Ash interrupted him. Placing a hand on his shoulder, he said he would take full responsibility. Even if Demian failed completely and messed everything up, it would be fine. All consequences belonged to the commander. Soldiers only followed orders. All Demian had to do was pull the trigger. He was avenging Van. The young man froze. All he had to do was pull the trigger. That was it. His revenge for his friend. Frowning, Demian repeated it quietly. Revenge for his friend. Then he pulled the cannon's trigger. A glow erupted around the artillery. The trait Thousand-Mile Eye activated. The gears began to rotate. Lightning crackled through the charged mana. Smiling, Ash muttered that this was it. A deafening shot rang out, beat them to a pulp. A massive beam tore through the air, hurtling forward. The sphere raced straight toward the Queen. Clenching his fists, Ash shouted for it to get hit. A devastating explosion roared in the distance. Ash turned to the lookout. Raising his hand, the soldier shouted that it hit the target dead center, right in the middle of the monsters. Laughing, he added that Demian was pretty impressive for a first-timer. Demian replied shakily that he'd only done exactly as instructed. The moment he grabbed the trigger, his body had started moving on its own. Ash looked away, confused. His body moved on its own. A skill notification appeared. It was all thanks to the trait Thousand-Mile Eye, a trait born from a god's mistake. The ability to see anything you wish to see and hit anything you wish to hit. Accuracy plus 999. An utterly broken trait that guaranteed a hit on the target. Covering his face, Ash reflected that in the game, Demian was a character who couldn't even properly hold a weapon. But here, all he had to do was grab it. They'd taken the full force of the attack. Then Ash suddenly looked up. Watching the explosion, he frowned. Why were they still moving? A spider stood amid the smoke. Demian pointed in fear, shouting that there was a swarm of spiders over there. Turning sharply, Ash shouted again, asking where they were suddenly heading. The spiders were moving. Ash clenched his teeth. The Queen stood within the smoke. The spiders gathered around her, forming a square to guard her. The Spider Queen glared furiously. Holding the telescope, Ash gasped. The monster's eyes glowed brightly. The entire swarm surged toward the fortress. A shout rang out. They were all swarming toward the artillery unit. Ash stared in shock. Had they not hit the Queen, this was a disaster. How was nothing happening to her? He muttered that it was impossible. The lookout yelled that there was trouble. All the spiders were rushing toward the fortress, every single one of them, heading straight for the artillery mount. Smiling coldly, Ash muttered that she'd finally sent out her orders. Not bad for an insect. Shells continued to rain down from the fortress. Ken panted heavily. Pulling out his flask, he realized he only had one potion left. Sitting on the ground, he wondered if he should just run. The blue sky filled his vision. Suddenly, Ken looked up in disbelief. He took a step forward, freezing near a tree. Leaves scattered through the air. He dropped to his knees. Demian's eyes widened. A catastrophic explosion thundered through the battlefield. A voice shouted that the Queen was dead. Only Ash clenched his teeth. The monsters kept attacking the wall. The spiders were still moving. The Queen's eyes lit up again, and Ash felt a chill run down his spine. Are we lacking damage? Frowning, he thought about it. In the original game, the Queen of the Black Spider Army would die from 1 or 2 hits from the artifact. After all, the Queen wasn't especially strong compared to combat-type mobs, but this was the tutorial stage. Ash's eyes widened. What if this Queen was different? The hero wondered. I have no information on her. What if her stats were different? What if she had a special gimmick? Blood splattered and a thought crossed his mind. What does it matter? She still had to be killed. Lightning cracked through the air. It sounded like the mana core was being forcefully blasted past its limits. Looking at Ash, a soldier shouted that they wouldn't be able to fire as many shots as expected. Ash snapped back, telling him to stop talking and asking how many shots remained. Frowning, the man replied that there were 5 shots in total. They'd already fired 2, so only 3 remained. Ash froze. 3 shots, they had no choice. The Spider Queen had to be killed within those 3 shots. Demian was breathing heavily, and Ash realized that Thousand-Mile Eye clearly had side effects. A maximum of 3 shots. Demian tightened his grip on the trigger. Watching him, Ash wondered if he could even last that long. Shells continued to rain down on the monsters. Ash noted with relief that the walls were still holding up. Then his eyes widened as a shout rang out. A demolisher was approaching. He looked up, the enormous monster stood still. Ash's heart sank. The center castle wall, a demolisher was trying to break through it. That had never happened in the game. Frowning in fury, he shouted for all firepower to focus on the demolisher. Cannons roared, shells slammed into the creature as it advanced. Ash's mind raced, the walls wouldn't hold. Suddenly the monster smashed through the wall. It halted for a split second. Then a massive swarm of spiders poured into the fortress. Ash clenched his teeth and shouted. Demian barked orders, telling everyone to fall back to the first floor. Ash stretched his hand forward, yelling for them to pull themselves together. The ones below would defend. They had to keep firing at the queen. Glaring ahead, Ash shouted that before those bastards reached the artillery unit, they had to kill the queen. The tower came into view, shooting preparations were complete. Ash turned toward Demian. The boy clenched his teeth. An explosion echoed in the distance. A voice shouted confirmed hit on the black spider queen, but she was still alive. Ash roared for them to reload immediately. Lucas swung his weapon, cleaving through spiders, shouting for everyone to protect the artillery unit and protect the prince. Ash looked down as soldiers formed a line in front of the monsters. A blow struck a knight. Spiders swarmed the defenders. Ash grit his teeth. Their numbers kept increasing. A man clutched something in his hands. Another was pierced by a claw, and suddenly a horrifying realization struck Ash. When he'd played this as a game, he never knew that this was a place where real people lived. Notification showing force numbers appeared. Ash realized that death wasn't just a number, it came with screams, blood, and unbearable stench. His eyes shook. At this rate, a soldier shouted for everyone to stick close to the cannon. They needed time to cool it down. Ash stepped forward, thinking bitterly that with only 5 shots the cannon would collapse before they even fired a fourth. Lucas glanced away in desperation. Ash searched frantically for a solution. As monsters overwhelmed the soldiers, a thought, one that had never occurred to him before, suddenly surfaced. A man stepped forward. Standing in the middle of the horde, Ken shouted that he was right here. Ash stared in disbelief. Ken drank a stamina potion and glared ahead, raising his voice as he declared himself a knight of the Empire. The monsters turned. They rushed toward him. Ken froze, then ran, shouting for them to come and get him. He spotted a rock and grinned, darting behind it. The trait survival method of a petty thief activated. Ash stared at the notification in shock and shouted for Ken to wait. His remaining health was too low. Ken was surrounded. Warning appeared, low health, skill cancelled. Gritting his teeth, Ken muttered that he shouldn't have trusted that bastard. Blood sprayed, Ash froze. Even from afar he could hear the horrific sound of flesh tearing. Spiders devoured the man alive. An image of Ken's family flashed in Ash's mind, and the crushing realization struck him. His order had taken another precious life. Knights surged forward, trying to drag Ken back behind the line, but blows rained down. It was announced that not only Ken, but everyone outside the wall was dying because of a single command. Ash's eyes widened. He had killed them. No, it was worse. Sitting there, Ash realized that throughout his entire playthrough he'd always used ordinary NPCs as bait. This damn game had been built on dice rolls. A notification appeared asking whether he would deploy a team of 2 to that location. Corpses littered the ground, to save someone, to get an item, to clear a side quest. To earn an achievement, he had always sent people to their deaths without hesitation. Ash yawned. Back then, he'd never doubted it, but now he understood everything. His hand trembled. Enough, he muttered. Then he finally understood the weight of everything he'd done. Ash glared forward and shouted that every death carried unbearable pain. Facing the monsters, he screamed for it to stop, but they wouldn't. Monsters couldn't be stopped by screams. A blow landed nearby. Lucas demanded to know why the prince was being targeted. Ash raised his head and said he was fine. They stared at the monsters in silence. Clenching his weapon, Ash muttered that he was right. There was only one way to stop them. Suddenly, he struck at the spider. Frowning, Ash realized the only way forward was to kill them before they killed everyone else. The soldier's eyes widened as he shouted that the 4th projectile was loaded, but Demian couldn't move. The hero glared at him and demanded to know if he could fire it. Closing his eyes, the boy answered that he could. Suddenly, the cannon roared. The projectile tore through the air toward the queen. She screamed as she saw it coming. The beam shot forward at incredible speed, and her shriek echoed across the battlefield. A devastating explosion thundered, and it looked as though the projectile had struck her directly in the head. The spider's eyes lit up. The monster remained standing amid the flames. It was said that this damn queen was still alive. The hero froze in disbelief. Soldiers dropped to their knees. A knight stretched out his hand and declared that their attacks were useless. Standing beside the cannon, another man said it had reached its limit. If they fired again, it would simply explode. Hearing that, the protagonist realized that either way it was over. They would have no choice but to surrender. Ash let out a long sigh and wondered if this truly was the end. Smoke poured from the cannon, clearly on the verge of collapse. Soldiers continued fighting the spiders, but it was said that their defensive line had already been breached. Demian covered his face, and the protagonist wondered if the sniper couldn't even bring himself to open his eyes. Could this really be the end? Lowering his hand, the hero thought they truly had no hope left. Then Demian shouted. Looking through the telescope, he cried out that no, their shots hadn't been in vain. The protagonist turned in shock. Shrapnel could be seen embedded in the queen's skin. It sounded like her armor had been damaged. Looking straight ahead, Ash turned to the lookout, realizing that despite everything, he had fulfilled his role to the very end. Frowning, the soldier shouted that if they fired just one more shot, they would definitely be able to kill her. Ash froze. At that moment, an explosion erupted on the tower. Lucas turned sharply. The protagonist was thrown off balance and began to fall. Debris rained down, and it dawned on him that everything had been destroyed, the world, their escape, all of it. A figure appeared before him. A bright light flashed. The hero suddenly regained consciousness. Lucas was sitting in front of him. Frowning, the protagonist looked at him. Lucas was shielding him with his own body, holding back the debris. He asked if Ash was injured. Ash reached out weakly and told him to ask himself. He was fine. Blood poured from Lucas's body. Looking down, Lucas asked what Ash remembered. That same incident from 20 years ago. The hero froze. As a player merely borrowing this body, he couldn't recall anything that connected them. Kneeling there, Lucas continued. He reminded him that when Ash first chose him as his bodyguard, he had said something to him. The protagonist asked what it was, then thought of the words himself, that even if he couldn't become emperor, he would become the coolest man in the world. Lucas bowed deeply. As the one who would become his knight, he had vowed to become the coolest knight in the world. Looking up in surprise, Lucas smiled and said that even though it had happened when he was just a child, those words had stayed with him throughout his entire life, up to this very moment. Sitting there, the protagonist heard him say that he believed in him. Looking down, Ash asked, "What, even in a situation like this?" Lucas frowned and replied that anytime, anywhere, the rubble collapsed further. Lucas suddenly fell to the ground. The ruins of the fortress came into view. Ash stood over him, looking down and thinking, hang on. Lucas lay unconscious. The protagonist told himself that he was the main hero, the savior of this world. He couldn't die here. Turning his head, Ash tried to grasp the situation. They were beneath an artillery installation. How long had he been unconscious? He looked around at the soldiers. Bodies lay scattered. Demian and the other artillery crew appeared to have survived without fatal injuries, but the cannon hadn't. Looking ahead, Ash wondered why they were still alive. What about the spiders? Standing amid the flames, a figure turned. Ash's eyes widened. Lily stood before him. She asked if this really wasn't the end. Gritting her teeth in pain, she closed one eye and asked if it was true. Ash reached toward her. Her hand trembled as she said she couldn't hold out much longer. She could still block the entrance for a bit, but soon the Demolisher units would break through the walls. There wasn't much time left. Stretching her arms out, Lily shouted that he had to hurry. Frowning, she added that he must not make their deaths meaningless. Ash clenched his teeth. Turning to the soldiers, he shouted at the artillerists to load the final shot. The man stared at him in shock and reminded him that the barrel's durability had long surpassed its limit. The moment it fired, the entire cannon would explode. Looking away, Ash replied that at this rate they would all die to the spider's claws anyway. Wouldn't it be better to gamble one last time? Even if they burned to death, the dice had to be thrown. A soldier beside him asked how they planned to aim it. They couldn't even see the target. There wasn't an angle to aim at the queen. Smoke poured from the cannon and it sounded like the support stand had already been destroyed. The cannon would have to be held by hand. Ash thought that if he had no teeth left, then he would chew with his gums. Looking at Demian, he said there was no need to aim. Demian just had to fire the cannon. The man frowned as the order was repeated, load the final shot. This was a direct command. He answered that he understood. Ash took a step forward, thinking that he didn't exactly know how Thousand Mile Eye worked, but as long as Demian fired the cannon, its effect would activate. He had to believe that was the case. Standing behind the boy, Ash spoke to him. Demian looked away as he heard that this would be the last time. All he had to do was fire one more time, just one more time, lend him his aid just one more time. Demian turned his head and asked if there was any meaning in doing all of this. No matter what he did, nothing would ever change. The hero lowered his gaze. The Spider Queen appeared and he heard a voice say that if Demian landed his shot one more time, the monster would die. Demian replied that he wasn't talking about that. Even if he pulled the trigger and killed the Spider Queen, would anything really change? Van was already dead. No matter how much vengeance he took, Van wouldn't come back. No matter how hard he tried, even if he struggled until the moment he died, the world would keep taking everything from him. He wanted to stop. He didn't want to live like this anymore. He said he would go to where Van was. Standing behind him, the protagonist shouted his name. Did he think this world was absurdly unfair? Did he think life was nothing but pain, no matter how many trials he overcame? Grabbing Demian by the clothes, Ash shouted for him not to bark obvious things like an idiot, calling him a stupid bastard. Difficulty levels appeared and it became clear, if this world had a difficulty, it was hell. Obviously Ironman mode, since saving and loading didn't work. The thought arose that this wasn't a game. From the very beginning, this world had been hell and Ironman. Ash glared and shouted that the world was absurdly unfair, nonsensical, and never worked the way he wanted it to. That was what the world actually was, and who didn't know that? A bright light appeared. But even so, was he just going to give up and die? Demian's eyes widened in shock. He thought to himself, was he really just going to give up? No. The conquest had to continue, until the very moment his life ended. Standing in front of him, Ash shouted that he would devise and struggle until the very last second. Grabbing his weapon, he said that if Demian wanted to give up and die so badly, then he should pierce his own throat with the blade right now. Swinging the weapon, Ash continued. But if he was a coward who couldn't even summon the courage to do that, then he would become his trigger. He told him to stop searching for his dead friend. The only thing he needed to function was him, his master. He didn't need reasons to continue living. Being his trigger was enough. Demian frowned. Looking straight at him, Ash said that was all he needed. A notification appeared for a new skill, Insubordinate Commander. His eyes lit up as he gave the order. He ordered his trigger to blast that goddamn monster's face off. A glow enveloped the boy. Looking at Ash, Demian replied that he understood, addressing him as His Imperial Highness. The ruins of the fortress came into view, and a voice announced that the final shot was successfully loaded. A soldier stared in fear and protested that there was no way to cool the barrel. At this rate, Ash cut him off and told them to get moving. Looking at the cannon, he said he would hold it. A soldier reached out in panic, shouting that it was extremely hot. If he touched it with his bare hands, it wouldn't just be a normal burn. Ash replied that he would rather have burns on his skin while alive than burn in an eternal hell after death. Turning to Demian, Ash asked if he was ready. Demian frowned and said he couldn't see anything. Ash told him it was fine. Demian said he couldn't feel his hands. Ash repeated that it was fine. Smiling, he said it didn't matter. Demian stared straight ahead. Ash grabbed the cannon, gritting his teeth as pain surged through him. He began lifting it off the ground. A soldier screamed for help for his highness. The soldiers rushed in, grabbing the red-hot cannon. Together, they lifted it. The enormous monster stared at them. Ash's brow furrowed, his mouth open as he addressed Demian. Demian's eyes lit up. On command, he pulled the trigger. Lightning surged around the cannon. Ash glared forward as a projectile formed inside the barrel. A thunderous shot rang out, the beam tore through the air. The soldiers were surrounded by spiders. Ash thought it had been impossible from the beginning. A shot fired at an invisible enemy beneath a collapsed citadel. There was no way it should have reached the target, but the projectile flew on. A brilliant glow appeared in the distance. Altitude disregarded, distance disregarded. Obstacles disregarded. The beam surged forward, lightning crackling through the air, as if reality itself was simply reproducing the commanded outcome. No matter how much the queen twisted or struggled, the beam pierced through the horde. The projectile flew on, and on the crown of the spider queen, who roared in rage or fear, the shot blew her head clean off. Ash stared in silence at the messages confirming it. He was speechless. The first message I received after I started streaming, I wasn't sure how to react to it. I'm going to drop a follow to your channel. You're going to be streaming next time too, right? And ooh. I can still clearly remember the feeling I had back then. Am I alive? He closed his eyes and clenched his teeth. Ash suddenly sat up, hearing a voice suggest that he should stay in bed a little longer, Your Highness. The man scribbled something on a piece of paper and explained that Demian had treated his wounds with healing magic, but the burns were quite severe, so it would take time for them to heal completely. Sitting at the table, the girl added that he'd been asleep for 3 days, Your Highness. She said she thought he would never open his eyes again after defeating the Black Spider army. The hero stared at her in disbelief. Lowering his head, he muttered that she survived. She replied that it was all thanks to his commands. The queen died after taking the final shot, and the Black Spider army ceased all activity immediately after they had won. The protagonist looked away. Soldiers carried the wounded past a massive flame. Reinforcements were heard clearing away allied corpses and disposing of the remaining immobilized spiders. The cleanup was almost complete now. Ash looked out the window and said that he understood. Sitting in a chair, Lily explained that His Highness had suffered serious burns on his hands, arms, shoulders, and neck. Once they returned to Crossroad, he would need to visit the temple. However, scars would remain even after the burns healed. Looking at his hand, Ash thought that it was a cheap price to pay for his life. Turning to Lily, he asked how she was doing. Her injuries, suddenly his eyes widened. Clutching the blanket, Lily said that when she ran out of mana, one of the spiders slashed her back. The queen died shortly after, so she didn't receive any further attacks, but it seemed her nerves had been damaged. She couldn't move her lower body anymore. Ash's mouth fell open. Looking down, Lily said there was nothing to worry about. She was grateful just to have escaped alive. Sitting in front of him, she added that the survivors, excluding the 5 artillerists, were Lucas, Demian, herself, and Ash. 9 people. Closing his eyes, the protagonist realized that before the final battle, there had been at least a few hundred people remaining, and yet only 9 survived. Lily sat quietly, wondering if there might have been another way. A better method she had overlooked. Maybe there was a way to save even one more person. Ken looked away, taking Ash's hand. Lily told him not to be too hard on himself. He wasn't a deity. There was no method that could save everyone in that situation. He had done his best. Looking down, Ash said that the one responsible for bringing the troops out there was him in the first place. It was something Ash had done, not him. But since he had entered Ash's body, this was something he had to take responsibility for as well. Holding the flag, he reflected that no one had known monsters would begin moving on such a massive scale for decades. That was why no one had stopped him from going to war. Lowering his head, he muttered for her not to be too hard on herself either. The door burst open. Lucas rushed in, shouting His Highness's name in relief. He asked if Ash was suffering from any discomfort and said he would immediately. Ash stopped him and said it was fine. Lucas winced, asking if that was really okay since Ash had been severely injured. Was it really fine for him to be walking around, placing his hands on his hips? Lucas laughed and said that being sturdy was one of his strengths. Ash thought that of course it was. He was an SSR rank knight. Holding documents in his hands, Lucas reported that while Ash had been unconscious, he'd completed the list of those killed in battle. There were many bodies they couldn't recover, but they'd gathered as many as possible. Ash frowned. Sunlight streamed through the window as he asked where the corpses were now. Lucas replied that they were in the northern plains of the forward operating base. Ash said he wanted to see them. He stood up and Lily immediately protested that he couldn't, he needed more rest. Ash frowned and said they had lost their lives under his command. He would go see them. He asked Lucas to support him. Demian looked up. They froze when they saw him. Demian smiled and exclaimed that His Highness was awake. Ash asked how his eyes were. Demian replied that they were fine. He'd started seeing again yesterday. Now he could see normally. He held his glasses in his hands. Ash looked down, remembering that Demian had treated wounded soldiers by himself, running all over the place using recovery magic while he couldn't even see. He too had suffered greatly. Ash told him that it was thanks to him that the plan had succeeded. Mountains of gold were presented, and it was said that if he wished, he could be rewarded with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of his life. Demian froze. He said that Ash had told him back then that he was his trigger, and he wanted to find the source of those monsters. Who created them and why Van had to die. He begged to be allowed to follow him. Ash frowned. Lucas smiled, raising an eyebrow. Ash replied that very well, then follow him now. They would need a priest to commemorate the fallen. The people stood before the blue flames. The protagonist stared ahead in silence, thinking that he already knew. There was no such thing as a better way. There was no such thing as a better strategy. There was nothing more foolish than thinking about what is for things that had already happened. Blue flames burned quietly. The bodies of fallen soldiers lay scattered on the ground. It was said that he had chosen a strategy and executed it, and this was merely the result. Standing still, Ash reflected that he had to take responsibility, carry it on his shoulders, and keep moving forward. Frowning, he ordered that once the abbreviated funeral was finished, all bodies were to be transferred. The flag was raised, and a thought crossed his mind. In Crossroad, thousands of casualties occurred every year. Funerals were more expensive than the lives of people in this world. Numerous graves appeared, and a voice said there was a vacant lot on the west side of Crossroad. They were to bury them there and mourn the lost. Ash realized that he planned to make a graveyard in the vacant lot to the west, the same place where he had built the memorial facility in the game. Looking straight ahead, he declared that the second month of every year would be the day to commemorate the sacrifices of these people. Standing before the flame, he gave the order and Lucas replied that he would obey. Ash thought that this wasn't only for these people, it was also for those he had killed without remorse during hundreds of playthroughs. He held the mouse in his hands. The soldier stood still, staring at the flames. Ash thought that this was his atonement. The fire burned brightly. A voice addressed Lucas. Frowning, Ash declared that he would never fail again. Looking at him, Lucas heard him repeat it. Never again would he fail. Standing firm, Ash gave the order to return to their main base to Crossroad. The view of the fortress shifted and a notification appeared announcing that Stage 1 had ended. The carriage sped forward. The squad crossed the field and Ash thought that after leaving the forward operating base, 3 days had already passed as they marched north toward the main base. A pendant glowed faintly around his neck. Looking up, Ash groaned internally that he was getting bored to death. Sitting in the carriage, he shouted for Lucas, asking if they were there yet. Lucas replied that they would arrive very soon and asked him to wait just a bit longer. Ash closed his eyes, thinking this felt like a delivery service. Lucas kept saying the same thing over and over. Frowning, Ash glanced at the notification and thought that he needed to make up his mind soon. Glow appeared near his hand and he realized he had reached level 5 after clearing the tutorial. In this game, a unit's class was determined at level 5. Looking at his stats, Ash saw title, Ash von Heider Everblack class. Beginner strength 2, stamina 2, agility 3, mana 3, intelligence 5. He frowned, wondering what kind of stat growth that was. It really was a trash character. Rubbing his face, he noted that one interesting thing was that despite the miscellaneous stat distribution, he could choose any class in the entire game. The problem was at the very end of the list. Tapping the notification, Ash muttered, "Over here, special class unit commander." It was his first time seeing a class like that, beginner commander. What kind of class was that supposed to be? Special class unlocked for clearing Hell Ironman mode. Was this a so-called hidden class? Looking down, he frowned again. The skill he had learned earlier was called Indomitable Commander. It felt like the game was blatantly telling him to choose the commander class. A notification appeared. Ash has awakened a skill. Passive skill Indomitable Commander, a skill created by a noble spirit that never gives up under any circumstances. Provides immunity to mental debuffs to all allies within a 10-meter radius. Reading it, Ash reflected that the skill was practically useless in the early game, since mental debuffs only appeared later on. Choosing a class he knew nothing about was risky. Sunlight poured through the window. A voice called out that Crossroad was in sight. Ash looked up in surprise and turned toward the window finally. Then his eyes widened. The wagons rolled toward the fortress. A full view of the base opened up and he realized this was Crossroad, the fortress built at the southern edge of the world. The massive gates opened and it was said that the fortress had been constructed to stop the monsters endlessly pouring out of the Black Lake to the south. The carriages passed through the gates. Ash thought about how in the past this had been the largest fortress of the Empire. A map appeared and he recalled that as monster invasions gradually subsided, the Empire's army had been dispatched elsewhere. During the army's absence, mercenaries were hired to defend the fortress. Ash stood still, reflecting on how these mercenaries were often old veterans nearing retirement, soldiers pushed off human battlefields or inexperienced greenhorns. Nationality and skill didn't matter here. The Empire simply needed meat shields to maintain the garrison. As cheap lives gathered, restaurants, inns, and banks began to appear. Looking ahead, Ash realized that after a decade, the fortress had transformed into a grotesquely oversized city. Tall towers rose into view. At some point, people had stopped calling Crossroad a fortress. Instead, they began calling it something else, the City of the Dead. On the front lines against monsters, an insect flew into view, and Ash thought it had another name, as if mocking mercenaries who flew to their deaths blinded by money like moths. The City of the Dead. Ash glanced to the side and thought that this place was much more worn out than he'd expected. So I'm really going to become the feudal lord of the city, huh? The atmosphere felt bad, no, heavy. Carts rolled slowly along the main street. Lucas looked at the townspeople. The protagonist stared silently out the window. Villagers frowned openly, their gazes sharp with anger. Ash looked ahead, confused, gripping the flag in his hands. It was explained that the newly appointed commander and feudal lord had barely returned alive after getting his entire force wiped out. Ash smiled faintly to himself. Still, he had expected something like this, so he was prepared. People pointed at the carts and whispered, "Look over there, aren't those magic crystals?" The stones glittered brightly. Ash thought that he had deliberately loaded them into the wagons where everyone could see them. Black spider magic crystals. Because they were high-level monsters, the crystals were extremely valuable. Valuable enough that anyone could imagine how expensive they were. Expensive enough that he wouldn't need to worry about funds for a while. Crossing his arms, Ash thought that after clearing an unclearable stage, he deserved at least this much. If he wanted to progress smoothly, the cooperation of the citizens would be essential. The people stared silently at the carriages. Ash realized that right now, the citizens' trust in him was less than zero. The townspeople's status windows appeared, and he thought to himself that he already knew how to raise their trust, through a very clear and reasonable method. Coins rained down. Looking away, Ash thought that he should let them wait just a little longer. The townspeople stared in disbelief as he spoke about purchasing goods here. The sky stretched overhead. The carriage slowed to a stop. A man reached for the door handle. Lucas closed his eyes and announced that they had arrived, Your Highness. Stepping down, Ash thanked him for his hard work. The feudal lord's residence came into view. Ash's eyes widened and he exclaimed in surprise. Looking at the palace, he thought that this was where he would be living from now on. It was incomparable to the place he used to live. He never imagined that the dream of owning his own home would come true like this, out of nowhere. Stretching his arms wide, he shouted in relief. A young man rushed forward. My lord, Ash stared at him blankly. The man hurriedly corrected himself, apologizing and saying he couldn't call him that, asking for forgiveness. Ash replied that he could call him whatever he liked. The man grabbed his hands anxiously, saying he'd been worried. His eyes widened as he added that Ash would have scars on his body. Ash realized that this overeager man with strong disloyal retainer vibes was named Ader. He was the city management NPC in the game. All administration in Crossroad went through him: facility construction, troop management, miscellaneous system options. It was probably the same here. In other words, Ash would be managing the city with this man. The palace doors opened and a cheerful welcome back rang out. Ader extended his hand, announcing that a warm bath and dinner were already prepared so Ash could rest for the day. Ash froze in surprise. Ader turned to Lucas, but Ash stopped him and told Lucas he could rest as well. Lucas agreed, but then protested that he had to stand guard. Ash cut him off and told him to rest and resume his duties tomorrow. Lucas closed his eyes and accepted the order. Watching him go, Ash grinned and thought that Lucas's room seemed to be on the first floor. The bathtub was filling with water. Ader gestured broadly, explaining that a warm, comfortable bath would wash away the fatigue of the journey and the stench of blood from the battlefield. Ash smiled to himself. It had been a long time since he'd taken a bath. He really was exhausted and felt like sleeping all day. Closing his eyes, he thanked Ader and dismissed him. Ash began unbuttoning his shirt. Suddenly, Ader smiled and said, "By the way, that was quite amazing, huh?" Ash froze. Ader spoke the name Mr. Classic Nerd. Shock ran through Ash. The water continued filling the bathtub. Ader closed the door and said that Ash had cleared the tutorial in a way he never would have believed possible. Ash grit his teeth and demanded to know what he was doing. Ader raised his hands, shouting that he couldn't hide it anymore. It was true, he was the director of Empire Defense. Ash punched him. Ader slammed into the floor, groaning in pain. Ash stared down at him in disbelief. "Director, this bastard." Ader looked up in fear, telling him to calm down. Kneeling, he shouted an apology for dragging him into a world like this. Frowning, he added that this world needed him, Mr. Classic Nerd. Ash swung at him again. Ader shut his eyes and apologized. Sitting before him, Ash said flatly, "All right, to summarize, you're that director from back then." A message appeared. "Director Mr. A, hello, Mr. Classic Nerd. I am the director of Empire Defense." Ash frowned and muttered that he really was the director of this game, no, of this world. Ader confirmed it. Ash wondered why he was talking like that and asked why he'd brought him here. Wiping his face with a handkerchief, Ader explained that this world had a true ending, the one and only ending that nobody had ever reached. He said he had reset this world countless times trying to reach it, but never once succeeded. Ash snapped his fingers and asked if that was why he sought help from someone else. Ader admitted that basically yes. Spheres floated into the air. Raising his hand, Ader declared that he had turned this world into a game and presented it to players from other world server lists appeared, and it was said that players had opened up countless possibilities in ways he'd never imagined. Raising his eyebrows, the young man added that not a single person had ever managed to reach the true ending. Looking at him, the hero asked if that didn't make him the same as everyone else. He'd never even known something called a true ending existed. Turning his head, Ader replied that while he hadn't reached the true ending, he had achieved something no one else ever had. Difficulty levels appeared and Ash realized that he alone had cleared that mode. Was that the reason? Sitting on the floor, Ader said that he believed Ash had the highest possibility of reaching it. Clenching his fists, Ash shouted that bringing him here was bullshit. He'd been kidnapped, thrown into the tutorial, into this guy's body. Ash looked at him in fear. Rubbing his head nervously, Ader stammered that it had been some kind of mistake, a bug. He hadn't expected it either. Then he quickly changed the subject, saying that in any case he should explain the reward Ash would receive if he helped them. Ash paused. A reward. Ader smirked and said that if Ash led this world to the true ending, he would grant him a wish. Ash stared at him in surprise. A wish? What is this, Dragon Ball? Raising his hand, Ader explained that technically he was a being close to a god in this world. Ash thought sarcastically about how convincing that sounded. A box opened, and Ader said it wouldn't be difficult for him to grant something like 10 billion won in cash. Looking away, Ash asked if that was it. Ader immediately replied that he could give 100 billion instead. Did he want more? Ash stared at him, confused. It felt like Ader was just handing out bad checks, but honestly, he was interested. A wish. He did have a dream he wanted to fulfill. Ash sat down at the computer. Staring ahead, he thought that if this guy really could grant that wish, then smiling, Ader asked if there was a dream Ash had given up on, thinking he'd never achieve it. Ash froze. Standing there, he realized that was the moment he understood. This self-proclaimed deity already knew. He knew Ash had regrets, that he'd been living with them all this time. Lowering his gaze, Ash stayed silent. Stretching his arms out, Ader said that dream he would fulfill it. As long as Ash still carried it in his heart, it wasn't over yet. Frowning, Ash asked that if Ader had that much power, why couldn't he just see the true ending himself? Looking straight at him, Ader explained that he had many restrictions. In this world, he was nothing more than an average human. That was why he needed an agent to act on his behalf. Like Ash, Ash sighed. The view of the palace widened as Ash asked a question. If he died here, what would happen? Smiling, Ader said that everything would end. If Ash died, Ash raised a finger, interrupting him. Ader groaned, cursing. Of course, life was a one-coin play. No loading. Ash knew that better than anyone, having cleared Ironman mode. Ash thought it was true. The game had always been like that, sometimes convenient, sometimes merciless. A spider's eyes flashed in his memory. The system never cared about fairness. Ader said that if Ash wanted to return to Earth right now, he could send him back immediately. But because of an interruption, adjusting his glasses, Ash asked him to explain. Ader told him to decide. Would he take on the challenge of reaching the true ending and earn the right to have his wish fulfilled? Or would he return to a peaceful life where he'd never have to risk his life again? The choice was his. Ash froze. Normally, he would have returned immediately, but two things stopped him. A glow appeared in his mind. One was his desire to fulfill that wish, and the other, his gaze hardened. It was doable. Ash raised his hands confidently. He had cleared this game in Hell Ironman mode. He knew this game inside and out. Clearing it one more time, he smiled. Whatever, he'd give it a try. Water dripped from the faucet, echoing softly. Standing in front of Ader, Ash said that he would genuinely try his hardest, so Ader better support him with everything he had, and he'd better not forget to grant that wish once the true ending was reached. Ader threw his hands up, shouting that of course he would, telling Ash to work him like a dog if needed. Ash nodded, fine, then he pointed a finger at him and gave his first order. Before morning, sell all the black spider magic crystals. Ader stiffened and asked what he meant. Ash snapped that they were items meant to be exchanged for cash. There had to be a sales route. Ader stammered that yes, but it was already late and the market was closed. Ash told him to shut up and do it anyway, send a letter. He didn't care how, just finish it. Grinding his teeth, Ader relented. There were 388 black spider magic crystals. He'd buy them at the average price. Even so, it would earn an enormous amount of money. Ader hesitated and asked what Ash planned to do with all that money. Ash replied calmly that there was an empty slot in the party, then he smiled. Looking at the mercenary guild, Ash thought, did he really need to explain? It was gacha time. Flipping a coin, he muttered that for now they'd test the waters. Clenching his fist, he grinned. How about 100 pulls? Gold-filled carts lined the street outside. A tired servant leaned against one of them as Ash stood before an inn, cautiously observing the scene. They looked energetic. Lucas stepped forward, saying he'd go first. The prince rudely barged into the room, bellowing a vulgar greeting, bonjour. The heroes stepped into the room. A mercenary jumped up aggressively and shouted, demanding to know who the hell they were, rudely asking if they had decided to die. The protagonist looked around contemptuously and asked filthily what that piece of stone had just said. The filthy dog stared back at him. Grabbing the mercenary by the head, the protagonist snarled arrogantly, declaring that he was their employer and asking if they really wanted a quick death. The mercenaries froze in fear, whispering among themselves that this was the third Prince Ash, the very same one. A woman added in alarm that she'd heard the prince had slaughtered his entire platoon on the front lines and asked if the spiders hadn't already been dealt with. Eyeing the assembled fighters with interest, the protagonist wondered if anyone here was actually worthwhile. An image of an old barn appeared. It was stated that new characters could be acquired at the Mercenary Guild, and of course their usefulness depended on rank. Now it was time for action. Casting a decisive glance forward, the protagonist demanded the best of the best. Turning toward a man, the protagonist cursed softly in shock and took a drag from his cigarette. Jupiter exhaled politely from his cigar and greeted the protagonist with calm courtesy. Turning gracefully, he solemnly announced that the prince stood within the Crossroad Continental Mercenary Guild. Protagonist stared at him mesmerized and took a hesitant step forward. Sitting down beside him, he curiously asked if he could learn his name. The man readily replied gladly. Placing a hand on his chest with pride, he declared his name was Jupiter and that it was an honor to meet him. Protagonist marveled at the revelation. Jupiter was an SR rank lightning attribute wizard. He couldn't believe this old woman, no, this veteran was sitting in a mercenary guild. Glancing curiously at him, the protagonist wondered where he'd seen such a uniform before and what country it belonged to. Jupiter stroked his worn uniform nostalgically and replied that it was the uniform of the Everblack Empire. The prince might not recognize it as the model was already several decades old. Looking up respectfully, the protagonist asked if he had served the Empire. Turning his bandaged eye, Jupiter proudly replied that he had served for 20 years and that life was tight on nothing but a veteran's pension. Smiling with admiration, the protagonist commented that sacrificing oneself for the country even after retirement was the mark of a true soldier. Jupiter replied honestly that it wasn't like that, he was simply desperately short on money. Placing a glass of whiskey on the bar, Jupiter casually asked what had brought the prince to such a humble place. The protagonist answered directly that he was looking for mercenaries and sarcastically asked what else one would come to a mercenary guild for. The one-eyed veteran looked away and brazenly asked if that meant he wasn't here to buy cannon fodder willing to die for him. Lucas glared and shouted that the mercenary was being insolent. The protagonist calmly stopped Lucas and told him to relax. Smoking his cigar, Jupiter remarked indifferently that it was fine and that rumors of the frontline battle had already spread. An image of a man in a red cloak appeared. Sunlight spilled across the bar as the protagonist said that he likely paid a heavy price for his overconfidence, even if they were vulgar fellows chasing money. Jupiter glared angrily and declared that despite all that, they shouldn't be treated like idiots digging their own graves. The protagonist nodded indifferently and said that he understood. Rising from his chair, he slowly told them to listen. Standing before the stunned mercenaries, he asked whether they weren't all selling their lives for a handful of coins. The mercenaries stared in confusion as he coldly stated that selling their lives was the only thing they were capable of, and asked if he was wrong. Then he asked why they were suddenly afraid to name their price. Slamming his hand on the table, the protagonist mocked them, asking if they were fools digging their own graves. Glancing provocatively at the one-eyed veteran, he remarked that this reeked of tyranny. Jupiter froze, cigar in hand, as the protagonist continued, stating that while his career had once been illustrious, he'd been decommissioned in disgrace after being secretly caught behind the scenes in military affairs. Glaring smugly, the protagonist added that it was the same as digging his own grave, and that Jupiter probably never thought he'd known about his past. An image of two shadowy figures in a warehouse appeared. The protagonist mercilessly continued, recounting defense industry corruption and smuggling with enemy nations. When he was caught, he was discharged as if being chased off, yet he still wore his uniform proudly. Leaning in with contempt, the protagonist summarized how shameless it all was and declared that Jupiter was the embodiment of corruption. A red imperial flag appeared. The protagonist added coldly that the one-eyed veteran was a fallen, rotten soldier, a disgrace whose war contributions had been erased. A dark image of the veteran appeared. Frankly, the protagonist admitted that Jupiter's combat ability was unquestionably real. He concluded vividly that the man looked more like a pirate than a soldier and formally announced him as the electric wizard Jupiter. Turning away with dignity, Jupiter declared that although his career hadn't ended well, he still possessed the pride of an imperial soldier. The veteran inclined his head slightly and warned the protagonist to be careful with his words. The protagonist met his gaze and asked how much he wanted, telling him to name his price, the price of his pathetic pride. Jupiter glared menacingly at him. Lowering his gaze, the protagonist told the veteran to name a price for becoming his hunting dog. Jupiter removed the cigar from his mouth and declared that despite his plain appearance, he certainly wouldn't come cheap. He stated that he earned at least 100,000 Adel per year. The cigar dropped to the floor. The protagonist shouted that he would pay him 200,000 for a year of work. Jupiter stared ahead stunned. The protagonist decisively repeated it, 200,000. He calmly noted that this was an extremely high price for a mercenary, proudly proclaiming himself the prince of the empire and the lord of the city. An image of a mesmerized boy appeared as the protagonist smugly added that he had also sold high-quality magic crystals. Tilting his head dismissively, the protagonist remarked indifferently that he would waste as much money as needed if it meant hiring an Asura-rank mercenary. He cynically presented a check for 200,000 Adel and mercilessly declared that he would pay twice Jupiter's yearly salary, right here, right now. Turning toward the other mercenaries, the protagonist declared loudly that cowards who didn't want to risk their lives could go home. But if they were true mercenaries seeking fortune, then they would need to meet a different set of conditions. He showed them the check and ordered them to report that evening to the vacant lot on the west side of Crossroad. A temple stood beneath a clear sky. After leaving the guild, the protagonist headed to the temple. An image of a snow-white altar appeared. Saintess Margarita removed her hands from the protagonist's neck and informed him that the treatment was complete, though a faint scar would remain. The protagonist thanked her politely. Margarita lowered her gaze modestly and replied that there was no need for thanks. The hero prudently thought that later, once a special condition was met, he could recruit her. He adjusted his collar and decided that would come later, not today. The protagonist placed a bag of gold coins on a stand and announced that, as promised, he had fulfilled all terms of their agreement. The girl turned to the gathered priests and said she had brought everyone who was currently available. Demian looked ahead with bright eyes, and the protagonist noted with satisfaction that he had adapted well. Turning to the priests, the protagonist announced that they would begin. Sunlight illuminated the temple as the protagonist stated solemnly that there was still much to be done today, and it would not be easy. That evening they would head west of Crossroad. The heroes stood within fenced-in cemetery. A line of coffins had arrived from the forward operating base. A soldier stood rigid beside one coffin, and the protagonist stated solemnly that a procession had arrived. A watch with a family photograph lay beside one grave. The protagonist gazed silently into the distance. Soldiers in black uniforms stood in formation before the gravestones, imperial flags draped over each coffin. Girls held hymn books with coral-colored lettering, and the protagonist noted that a large choir had gathered. In a city where death was common and vulgar, proper funerals were rare. A girl collapsed over one of the graves. The protagonist added that the families had been compensated. The townspeople whispered among themselves. The protagonist explained that news of such an enormous compensation had spread rapidly. Rumors once started were like avalanches, unstoppable. Looking ahead, the protagonist stated plainly that he had no intention of sugarcoating it. This was a show, a reasonable one. A massive red banner fluttered beneath the evening sun. The protagonist declared that on the front lines, their battles should be remembered as a noble mission to save humanity. Stepping forward, Ash stood before the banner and officially announced himself as the third prince and newly appointed lord, Ash von Hyder Everblack. The townspeople murmured in confusion, whispering that he was that psycho prince, a foolish new lord. Turning toward them, the protagonist spoke plainly. Lowering his head, he stated that they would die on the front lines. Ash continued, saying that new tombstones would be added to the cemetery every week, each accompanied by a choir. The townspeople stared at him in confusion. He coldly explained that their deaths were more expensive than their survival. Funeral expenses and compensation were extremely costly. A red crystal appeared as he added that nearly half the money earned from selling magic crystals had already been spent on compensation. A novice in black robes stood near a grave. The protagonist concluded that death should not be something common or vulgar. Surveying the crowd, Ash made his promise. He would keep them alive for as long as possible. The girls stared at him in shock. Ash finished firmly. So everyone don't die so easily. The helmeted knights turned their heads toward the protagonist. He spoke to them plainly, telling them to live on and take as many paychecks as they could. Jupiter lit another cigar, and the protagonist matter-of-factly added that they should survive and take as much money as possible. Guns and bayonets were raised solemnly toward the sunset-red sky. Ash concluded pragmatically that they shouldn't die and make him pay for their expensive deaths. The sunset sky turned pink. The protagonist finished his speech, calmly wondering how the citizens would receive it. He cynically turned and walked away from the stage. Behind him, the townspeople muttered excuses from an incompetent commander, the nasty lord wasting money. Indifferently, Ash thought that it didn't matter what they thought. He would simply prove everything through results. His cloak fluttered in the wind as he made a firm promise to himself that as long as he stood on this monster front line, he was more capable than anyone else. Clapping his hands together, the protagonist declared that it was time to clear stage 1. A system screen appeared, stating that 3 days and 1 hour remained until the start. After the funeral, moonlight illuminated the dark forest behind the Crossroad Manor. 2 silhouettes stood in the castle courtyard near a pile of stones. A system notification appeared, asking whether the teleport gate should be activated. Ash looked at the screen confidently and answered without hesitation yes. The pile of stones lifted into the air. Boulders rearranged themselves, forming a structure as a portal burst forth with a bright magical glow. The heroes stared into the teleportation gate. The protagonist explained that it was the gate leading to the dungeon beneath the lake. He stepped forward and clarified, "By lake you mean?" "Yes, that was right." Ash raised his hand and declared that it was a free pass leading straight to the enemy base. The game's title appeared on screen. The protagonist explained that Empire Defense was a game combining two genres. Even the cover showed it. When monsters attacked, it became a tower defense stage, but between those stages when the enemy wasn't attacking, there was another phase. An image of a dark ravine appeared. Here, players could explore the dungeon beneath the lake and uncover the origins of the monsters. Pixel graphics appeared. The protagonist called it free exploration. This was the basic structure of the game, alternating between defense and offense. Turning toward the portal, Ash remarked that just as expected, it could be activated before Stage 1. The game was brutally difficult, but not unfair. Memories from the tutorial flashed through his mind. He admitted that he'd been through hell there, but the start now was excellent. 2D character images appeared. He had Demian, practically a cheat character, and Jupiter, an SR rank AoE striker. A coin icon appeared. And on top of that, he had plenty of funds. Ash clenched his fist excitedly. It seemed doable. No, very doable. Turning to his companion, the protagonist said he'd already explained the rules of the game to Lucas. They were heading out to scout the enemy's base for the next stage. Lucas slammed his fist into his palm and said he understood everything. He straightened his posture and announced that he was ready. Ash stared at him, dumbfounded. Lucas looked at him with interest. In truth, Lucas should have had the most questions of all. The protagonist recalled their earlier quarrel and thought it would have been perfectly reasonable for Lucas to find many things strange, yet he followed orders without a word. Ash glared at him silently displeased. Didn't he have anything he wanted to ask? The sky slowly brightened. Ash finally called out to him and asked if he had any questions. Lucas looked into his eyes calmly. Ash grimaced slightly. Lucas bowed respectfully and declared that he was His Highness's sword and shield. His duty was simply to cut down and block whatever his master commanded. Moonlight bathed the courtyard as Lucas repeated that he existed only to slash and block at Ash's order. Ash stared ahead, puzzled. There was no way Lucas didn't have doubts. Then he understood. Lucas was saying that he trusted him more than his own questions. Ash turned away with a frustrated sigh, thinking that he'd have to give him a lot of bonuses later. Then he asked one final thing. "All right, Lucas, are you prepared to enter the jaws of hell with me?" The protagonist stepped into the portal and asked if he was ready to descend into hell together. Lucas raised his head sharply and declared that he would gladly follow him to the very bottom of hell, as long as it was with him. Ash looked at his trusted companion with satisfaction. The game system prompted them to select a destination. Lakeshore. Ash tapped the screen. The portal glowed intensely. The rocks collapsed violently. The system announced mechanically loading teleporting. Another system message appeared explaining that heroes could become stronger through equipment obtained from dungeons or crafted at the forge. Ash snapped in annoyance, telling it to stop popping up tip windows out of nowhere. It was too late to pretend to be a friendly game now. He stepped forward. The heroes stood on the lake shore. Surveying the surroundings, Ash stated calmly that they were in the right place. Dark lake water stretched before them. He grimly explained that this black lake was the source of the monsters. Rocky mountains loomed ahead. Ash added that this was a place that vomited nightmares. Lucas suddenly shouted in alarm, pointing ahead. The water began to boil. The ocean parted before the heroes. Enormous magical hands burst forth from the ground. A massive cauldron blazed with a blue aura as warriors crawled up from beneath the seabed. Ash stared at the scene in horror and screamed desperately, "FCK, no way, it can't be." The enemies advanced with deathly steps. Lucas, frozen in shock, asked if those really were living armors. Ash clenched his teeth in rage and shouted hopelessly, "Why did it have to be these bastards?" He growled furiously, saying it didn't matter which monster they had to face in Stage 1. Images of various monsters appeared. He would have been fine with goblins, fine with mermaids, or even wyverns. Dark silhouettes filled the screen. Among all the low-level monsters, the warriors closed in on them. "These," Ash panicked, "are the monsters we have to stop this time." Clutching his head in despair, he cursed that this definitely wasn't bad luck. Lucas stared at the scene gloomily and resignedly said that these were the monsters they had to stop this time. The game system appeared above Ash's head, automatically updating enemy information. Detailed statistics were displayed. Unit level 5 living armor assaulter total units, 1,052. Ash froze. "Wait, what? 1,000? Lucas glanced at him, confused. Seeing Ash's pale face, he asked anxiously if His Highness was alright or if he was feeling unwell. Ash grimaced. Leaning toward Lucas, he muttered bravely, "I think I said this back in the tutorial too, we're FCK'd again." Shit, the enemies continued advancing in countless numbers. The number 741 appeared. Ash scratched his head bitterly and said that was the number of times he had reset the game. Every run ended differently, but the moment he saw Stage 1 monsters being living armors, he reset without hesitation. An image of the enemy appeared as he explained that living armors were literally monsters made of armor. Red X appeared and he concluded that they were extremely resistant to physical attacks. Various items flashed across the screen. Ash admitted that things got easier mid-game after acquiring proper equipment, but right now, everything they had was at a disadvantage. At this moment, they had nothing that could counter these monsters. As the enemies advanced, Ash shouted furiously that it just had to be these monsters. Grinding his teeth, he reflected that he could even feel malice at this point, like someone was deliberately trying to ruin the game for him. The enemies crawled closer. Ash noted grimly that there were only 3 days left until the stage began. Staring resolutely at the horde, he ordered Lucas to return for now. Lucas immediately agreed. As the armor continued advancing, Ash concluded stoically that he would have to try everything possible. Sunlight reflected off glass. Ash suddenly shouted, "Where are you, Ader?" An image of the palace appeared as he repeated the call irritably. Ada rushed in, reporting excitedly that he was back, my lord. Ash turned and asked bluntly about the state of the city's troops. Ada replied clearly that there were currently 526 men available for frontline deployment. Ash staggered back in shock. How could this be? I rolled 100 times, how do we only have 500? Ada lowered his head and explained awkwardly that most of the troops had been wiped out during the tutorial. Ash cursed loudly. That Ash, stupid son of a bitch, how many more troops can we recruit? Sunlight streamed through the window as Ada replied despairingly that all mercenaries in the city had already been hired. Ash asked if that meant there were no more left. Ada replied that at least within the city, yes. Ash turned sharply and ordered him to send patrols to nearby cities to borrow troops, promising to pay double the usual weekly wage. Ada wrote everything down and agreed. Night fell, towers rising in silhouette. Ash added gravely that a messenger should also be sent to the main empire, informing them that monsters had begun mobilizing and requesting maximum reinforcements. Ada hesitated and asked nervously if that was really a good idea. A warning pop-up appeared. Warning, this action triggers a certain fatal event later. Ash declared resolutely that there was no other choice, he had to survive for now. Clutching his head, he ordered that all carpenters, masons, blacksmiths, and alchemists in the city be summoned, no, conscripted. Turning back, he repeated the order matter-of-factly. Ada protested anxiously that doing so would halt magic crystal production. Ash grabbed him by the collar and snarled that the city was about to collapse anyway, why would he care about crystal production? He ordered the line shut down immediately and everyone brought in. Ada panicked but agreed. The hero slammed the door shut. Ash rubbed his forehead bitterly and remarked cynically that the game's difficulty right now was completely abnormal. He admitted that he'd been indecisive until now. Pulling up the control display, he concluded firmly that there was no room left for hesitation. Looking at the screen, Ash stated calmly that the more difficult a game is, the more variables are required. The game system appeared on the hero's screen and formally asked, Beginner Commander, would you like to choose your class? The protagonist stared at the prompt, then decisively concluded that he might as well gamble. Oppressing the screen, Ash furiously grumbled, Fine, I'll say yes, you bastard. The game system appeared solemnly before the hero and officially announced its congratulations. The selected class became Beginner Commander. Ash looked at the visual changes and immediately felt disappointed. The effects were lousy. Suddenly, the hero clutched his chest. His eyes widened in shock as he asked in confusion, what was that? That feeling I just had. The game system automatically informed him that a 50% debuff had been applied to stat growth. Ash slowly looked up at the screen, still confused. What did it just? The game system indifferently informed him once again that a 50% debuff had been applied to equipment proficiency. The hero froze. An image of a palace appeared on the screen and Ash furiously screamed, what the actual FCK is this? What kind of class gives debuffs like these? Furiously clutching the screen, he shouted, what the hell is this? What class could possibly impose such a crappy debuff? Grabbing the poker in rage, Ash screamed that they were stupid pieces of before he could finish. The game system joyfully announced. Acquired trait Attack Totem, acquired trait Defense Totem, acquired trait Super Buffer, acquired trait Main Order. You can now use the protagonist stopped mid-rant, staring blankly at the notifications surrounding him. Confused, he muttered, what are all these now? The fireplace quietly crackled as Ash began reading. Defense Totem increases the morale of allies simply by standing on the battlefield, providing a 5% bonus to all allies' defense power. Super Buffer enhances the stats of the commander unit by 1 rank. Attack Totem increases the morale of allies simply by standing on the battlefield, providing a 5% bonus to all allies' attack power. Ash paused, then slowly spoke, so as long as I'm standing on the battlefield, I can provide bonus buffs to all allies. I can boost both attack and defense stats. He nodded to himself. Honestly, I can understand this. This is pretty awesome. A diagram appeared and the game system continued explaining party synergy. Depending on the party member's class composition, the party would receive additional stat bonuses. Try different combinations. Plus, it was a class-exclusive system. Ash smiled admiringly at the screen. There's no better class than this. I used to be a player commanding other units around after all. The hero grabbed his weapon. The poker hung near the fireplace. The next day, the sun brightly illuminated the palace roof. Ash looked at his subordinate and indignantly demanded an explanation for what the hell had happened. Ada lowered his gaze in shame and honestly explained that they hadn't really complied with the conscription order. Nearby, the artisans sat with their hands bound. The hero declared that the leaders of the unions were to be brought in immediately. Covering his face with one hand, the protagonist whispered, "This is basically kidnapping." "What is the meaning of this?" The president of the blacksmiths union glared at the hero. "What the hell is going on?" The carpenter and the mason also glared at him, complaining that they'd been interrupted while working on their crystals. One of them demanded, "Are you going to take full responsibility for the loss?" The bearded president of the alchemists turned toward Ash and asked, "Isn't this too much even for a member of the imperial family?" Looking at the enraged artisans, the protagonist panicked internally. "Everyone's mad, look at him screaming with a red face, I should apologize first." Suddenly, Ash began glowing purple. He growled menacingly, "You dare raise your voice in my presence? Are you not aware of who I am?" Towering over his subordinates, Ash haughtily asked who they thought they were to raise their voices before him. Pressing his fingers into the table, he authoritatively declared, "If I, the prince of this country and the lord of the city, call for you, then you come here with your own feet immediately without excuses." Glaring at them, he added coldly, "Yet here you are hurting my feelings. Do you truly wish to die?" The senior craftsman stiffened and hurriedly bowed. "Oh, our sincerest apologies, this is our first time serving a lord from the imperial family." The protagonist smugly thought that it was very convenient to be Ash in situations like these. And just like that, the negotiations went smoothly. The senior craftsman stared ahead in disbelief. "Are you really serious?" Ash raised his hand calmly. "Of course I'm serious. I will provide you with 20% of the magic crystals the military recovers at the original cost." An image of magical crystals appeared as Ash continued. In exchange, when I give an order, you will prioritize producing military supplies. I will of course pay the exact amount required for production. Looking confidently at the artisans, he asked in a businesslike tone, how does that sound? Not a bad deal, no. Clasping his hands, Ash smugly concluded internally that he was roasting them. This is the best negotiation I can afford for now. A little too mammonistic, one might say. The workers looked at one another in confusion. The protagonist briefly considered enticing them further with money and interest, honestly admitting to himself that this was the best he could do for now. Coins rained down, and the protagonist philosophically remarked that there was nothing more trustworthy than money in this world. The senior craftsman threw his hands up excitedly. Then when do we start? Watching his subordinates with satisfaction, the protagonist once again concluded that there was nothing in this world more trustworthy than money. Suddenly, the game system announced ominously. Stage 1 until start 2 days and 13 hours. The enemies began moving toward the heroes, and the protagonist calmly began, I reckon you've heard a rough explanation of the situation from Lucas. The armor extended a hand toward the screen as the hero ominously explained that monsters, 1,000 living armor units to be exact, were currently advancing toward their front. An image of a fortress appeared, and the protagonist added anxiously that their expected arrival time was approximately 2 days from now. The hero stared ahead in frustration. Glancing at his stunned subordinates, he remarked, I can tell everyone just realized we're FCK'd from their expressions. Lucas leaned in confidentially and asked what was required of them. Ash replied simply that they should do their best. Leaning forward, the hero addressed everyone. Starting now, I'll be giving instructions to each of you. The castle glistened under the sunlight. Lucas placed his hand over his chest and promised he would do his best. Ash looked at him critically and noted that the soldiers would become lax if left alone. He ordered Lucas to discipline them properly, and the boy immediately agreed. Lily timidly scratched her chin and shyly tried to speak. Looking at Ash hesitantly, she began to say something, but the prince interrupted her apologetically. I need your help desperately. Ash looked at her reassuringly and gently added, you won't be dispatched to the battlefield, so don't worry too much. Lily blinked in confusion. Pardon, then what will I be doing? She bowed her head submissively and replied that she understood. The hero then solemnly announced, sorry to break it to you, Lily. There won't be such a thing as retirement for you. Looking away, Ash mercilessly added, your future is to suffer as a civil servant in this city for the rest of your life. Jupiter, smoking a cigar, spoke up casually. Could I ask just one thing, Your Highness? That yearly salary you mentioned, casting a slight glance at Ash, he cautiously asked if it would be raised should this old mercenary perform well. The protagonist frowned internally. You money-hungry granny, that obsession with money, especially gold, the game system displayed the stats. Equipped traits 1 out of 3, Goldbug cannot be unequipped. Ash scoffed sarcastically. It's literally the same as I saw back in the game, damn it. Sunlight filtered through the window as he spoke aloud. I'll give you a raise depending on your performance. Jupiter smiled smugly. Then you better start thinking about next year's raise, Your Highness. You won't find another mercenary who gets the job done like I do. Puffing on his cigar, he boasted that no mercenary could outperform him. The system solemnly declared him captain of the Special Operations Troops. The protagonist's assistant carefully handed a weapon to a subordinate. Take this, Demian, I prepared it for you. Demian accepted it and the system displayed. Normal crossbow LV10 attack 10 to 15 durability 30 out of 30 bonus. None, I'll try, Demian said firmly. Raising the weapon, he added solemnly, if it is your order, Your Highness. The system declared him long-range sniper. Ash observed him critically. The posture's a little sloppy, but considering how well you fired the Mana cannon, you'll get used to it quickly. Looking away, Ash asked casually, have you decided to take them off? Demian looked confused. Take what off? Ash tilted his head, puzzled. The boy admitted honestly, yeah, to be honest, my eyesight was too good. Scratching the back of his head shyly, Demian explained that he used to wear random glasses to deliberately limit his vision. Smiling awkwardly, he concluded, but now that I need this eyesight, I decided not to wear glasses. Ash glanced at his subordinates. The assistant adjusted his fancy glasses with satisfaction and remarked smugly, that's fortunate. I was worried about overlapping characteristics. Ash turned toward him and snapped rudely, can you keep your mouth shut, please? After the operation meeting, they moved west of Crossroad. Workers were busy repairing the fortress wall. The construction foreman, spotting the prince, eagerly bowed. Welcome, Your Highness, Ash asked matter-of-factly, how's the castle wall? The foreman glanced at it sadly. Honestly, it's not great. It's been neglected for quite some time. Ash frowned deeply. Turning on his subordinate, he shouted angrily, then shouldn't repairing the castle walls be the basics of the basics? Why did you let it get like this? The assistant lowered his head guiltily. We didn't have the funds as monsters appeared less often, magic crystal production decreased. The former lord reduced the budget. Ash scratched his forehead irritably. Wasn't this fortress built to block monsters in the first place? He scoffed. Reduced income weakens the fortress meant to stop monsters, how contradictory. Deciding immediately, Ash raised his hand and ordered, use whatever budget and materials you have. Reinforce and repair it until it feels excessive. Do you understand? The monsters are approaching even now. They then arrived at the wood workshop. The heroes stood before the carpenters. Planks were scattered everywhere. Ash spoke gravely. I reckon you've heard the whole story. What you'll be making over the next 3 days is pardon, the carpenter asked, confused. Ash stared at them confidently. You'll be building a wall, I said, a wall, a tall one. You know, something that blocks the way. The carpenter hesitated. I'm sorry, Your Highness, but the monsters will easily break through a wooden wall. It would be difficult to expect it to function properly. Ash leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. What I need isn't a strong wall that keeps them out forever. Pardon? The carpenter blinked, frowning. Ash explained clearly, all you have to do is make it exactly how I tell you. He raised his hands emphatically. A wall. So damn high, spreading his arms wide, Ash firmly concluded, then looked down rudely and snapped. Now, stop asking questions. Get to work. The protagonist stood before the workers with both hands raised. The sun shone down on the small barn as he firmly ordered them to stop asking questions and get to work. With the 2 remaining days, the preparations proceeded steadily. Time flew by, the southern wall of Crossroad. Lucas stood firmly before the warriors. Demian fired his crossbow in repeated tests. Jupiter rested lazily under a tree. The protagonist fumed internally as he watched his subordinates. The mages stared intently into a glowing magic ball, and Ash energetically declared that preparations were in full swing. An image of a red flag appeared as the fortress stood beneath a clear blue sky. The game system suddenly appeared tense and urgent. Stage 1 until start 30 minutes. The protagonist raised his binoculars and stared toward the forest. Enemies burst out from the trees. The guard jerked his binoculars down and screamed, "They're coming!" A warrior pounded the drum in panic. The enemies are approaching the fortress. They advanced rapidly. A massive crowd rushed toward the walls. The fortress trembled from the sheer number of enemies. The heroes gripped their weapons tightly. An image of the fortress wall appeared as the hero shouted courageously, "There's no need to worry." Standing atop the fortress, Ash threw his head back and declared loudly, "Those monsters are nothing but a rabble with large numbers." As the warriors advanced, Ash honestly thought that wasn't true at all. From the very beginning, the Living Armor Legion was among the worst monsters he could have faced at the stage. The knight stared ahead as Ash hypocritically continued, "We are the strongest army in the southern part of the Empire." And in his mind, he admitted the truth. "That's not true either. We're just a group of wandering mercenaries trying to make a living." The warriors rolled out the cannons and Ash enthusiastically declared, "The preparations for the defense battle are perfect. The condition of our equipment is the best." That's also not true, he thought desperately. "No matter how much money I poured in, the preparations are still insufficient." Turning confidently to his comrades, Ash shouted, "We can stop them, there's nothing to worry about." "I'm shouting nothing but bluffs," he admitted inwardly. Weapons were loaded. Ash raised his voice commandingly. "Everyone just follow my orders." He looked optimistically at the heroes and solemnly promised, "The only one who should be worried here is me." The enemy army churned forward like a whirlwind. Ash smiled nervously and whispered, "Good luck, Jupiter." Thunder cracked across the sky as he continued seriously, "Statistics and data won't decide whether we clear the stage." Jupiter grinned smugly, "Looks like it's time. Watch and learn, you suckers." With dramatic flair, the expensively hired electro-wizard began to move. Her horse trotted forward. The squad charged straight ahead. Ash noted calmly that the monsters shared one common principle of action. Jupiter took a long drag from her cigar. "These things exist to destroy humanity," the hero explained. The squad maneuvered away from the monsters as Ash continued, "If there are no obstacles, they always take the shortest path." The ground beneath the undead suddenly collapsed. One by one, they plunged downward. Ash nodded internally. Since it's obvious which path they'll take, traps work wonders against them. Jupiter stared down into the abyss. "Jupiter now," Ash shouted. He reflected briefly that the trap couldn't be dug too deep because of their limitations, but this was enough. Lightning began to gather overhead. Jupiter smiled. "Time to show what I was paid for." A massive bolt of lightning slammed down. Her horse reared back as undead were swallowed in a bleaching zone. Jupiter stared into the pit as survivors struggled to rise. Souls glowed beneath shattered helmets. She shouted, "What the hell are you looking at?" Then roared, "Have some respect for the elderly, you disrespectful monster pieces of shit." Lightning descended again, charging every piece of living armor. Ash stepped back slightly. Is this her signature move? Lightning erupted straight from her cigar. Jupiter wrapped herself in crackling electricity. "We're having fried armor tonight," she laughed. "Make sure you chew them well, kids." She waved her hand forward, bleaching again. Another colossal bolt struck. The warriors atop the wall erupted in cheers. Ash smiled faintly. Her first skill leaves a lingering mark on anything it hits. He stared back toward the battlefield. Jupiter peered into the ditch. Broken armor littered the ground. She crushed the remains beneath her boot. Across the moat stood a massive army. "There are still 1,000 of them," Ash noted calmly. "That attack was nothing more than a scratch. You may retreat, Jupiter." Ash raised his voice. "Everyone fall back." Jupiter turned sharply. "Turn back." The squad withdrew as undead surged after them. "Run, run, kids," Jupiter shouted. Ash watched the pursuit closely. "It's going exactly according to plan." "Everyone wait," he ordered suddenly. Grinding his teeth, Ash thought, "Just a bit more." Jupiter shouted, "Move more, Jupiter." The boy beside her stared in surprise as the squad accelerated. They approached the wooden fortifications. Ash clenched his fist. Perfect. Several towering wooden structures stood under the sun. Living armor raised their heads. A fortress loomed ahead. Ash crossed his arms and shouted mockingly, "Welcome, first time seeing a FC-kin wall, huh? What will you do now?" The undead froze. Jupiter snapped her head around. Horses surged forward, and the enemy army charged straight through the wooden structures. The protagonist peered through the narrow gap and thought calmly, "I blocked the path completely." Normally, they would have destroyed the wall and pushed straight through. That means they'll try to force their way through the narrow opening. Raising his hand, he shouted, "Soldiers, ready, fire!" The undead surged forward, pushing against the wooden walls. Ash narrowed his eyes. Their formation is tightening, their mobility is dropping. He lifted his hand again. "You've waited long enough, soldiers, don't spare." Then he thrust his arm forward. "Fire, all artillery!" The cannons roared. Cannons on the opposite side answered immediately. Shells arced high above the battlefield. The living armor lifted its head just as deafening explosions erupted. Ash nodded internally. This is one of the most basic strategies in defense games. The shells ripped through the enemy ranks, thinning the formation. Explosions echoed across the battlefield as cannon fire continued relentlessly, tearing apart the living armor trapped between the wooden fortifications. "Keep firing," Ash ordered. He straightened his posture. Demian glanced nervously to the side. "Isn't this all we have to do?" The shelling continued without pause, and the boy added in disbelief, "The monsters, they can't get past that point." Ash's gaze hardened. "It's not over yet." At that moment, the undead's eye sockets flared to life. One by one, they pulled something forward. Shields. A massive wall of shields rose instantly, locking together. Ash clicked his tongue and gritted his teeth. "Yeah, of course, this isn't the end yet," he sneered darkly. "Those hardy little bastards." The protagonist abruptly turned and shouted "Activate" before quickly correcting himself. "Activate the gravitational field artifact," he ordered. She immediately looked at him and relayed the command. A ring slowly rose above the orb, its surface lined with distinct notches. The mages raised their hands in unison and announced, "The artifact is being activated." A translucent sphere spread out, enclosing the undead. Gravity suddenly pressed down on them, forcing their movements to slow. Ash turned and declared that it would now be much harder for them to advance. Lucas spun around sharply. "Ballista unit, get ready," he shouted. The soldiers rushed into motion, repositioning the cannons. Moments later, every weapon was set. A knight raised his sword high and shouted for them to aim at the enemy's chest. Then he swung his blade down and gave the order to fire. Arrows shot forward all at once, piercing through the enemy ranks. Living armor collapsed one after another. One arrow lodged directly into an undead's head, dropping it instantly. Ash stared across the battlefield, his thoughts racing. Build up damage with crossfire, then finish them off using the artifact and the ballisti just as planned. Then his eyes widened. "They're going around the wall," he shouted. Several thousand enemies began bypassing the wooden barricades. Ash clenched his teeth. "I thought that might happen, but there are more than I expected." Jupiter lifted her head when she heard her name. Ash lowered his voice and gave a clear order. "I'm leaving the living armors coming from the right side of the fence to you. Fend them off using hit-and-run tactics." She broke into a wide grin and nodded. "Got it." Then she charged forward, shouting, "Let's get to work." Giddy up, the undead continued their advance. Jupiter laughed, clearly enjoying herself, and urged them to try it. Ash turned his attention back to the battlefield. "Good, Jupiter's holding the right side, that just leaves the left." He turned to the boy beside him. "It's your turn, snipe the monsters coming from the left." Demian raised his hand slightly, then immediately lifted his crossbow. He took a slow breath, pulled the trigger, and fired. The arrow flew straight toward its target and struck the enemy square in the face. The living armor trembled violently before completely crumbling apart. Demian froze, then blushed when he realized he had hit it. Ash smiled faintly. "This is Thousand Mile Eye. To think it could pierce a phantom's soul core with a normal arrow, just how broken is this overpowered trait?" He surveyed the battlefield again. The center is a kill zone, Jupiter's on the right, Demian's on the left. Protagonist grinned. "We're really close to 500 kills. At this rate, things should be smooth sailing until the boss monster shows itself." We were pressed for time, but all those preparations really paid off. The armor's soul glowed brightly as enemy remains scattered across the battlefield. Then the sky itself changed. A massive crater formed overhead. Ash stiffened. Was there anything like this in the game? At that very moment, the kill count crossed 500. A silhouette began to form inside the crater. Slowly, the shape of a face emerged until it was fully visible. Ash clenched his teeth as a screen appeared before him, displaying the monster's name. A colossal spirit descended toward the wall. The boss monster of the Living Armor Legion, a pixelated miniature, appeared, and Ash explained that this entity was the source of the Legion's strength. The Living Armors were powerful on their own, but even after defeating them all, a second phase would begin, and the boss would appear. "But we haven't defeated all of them yet, so why did it appear already?" The spirit touched the ground, its face twisted into a grin. Ash quickly realized something was off. The Spectre Knight didn't move. It didn't unleash an AoE debuff, nor did it launch any attacks. It simply floated there, motionless. But this wasn't a game. "The hell is that?" someone shouted. The warriors stared up in horror. Ash understood immediately. Just the sudden appearance of such a massive monster was enough to throw the soldiers into panic. This is bad. This is the difference between a war between humans and a war between humans and monsters. He watched the soldiers atop the wall freeze. The mere presence of the boss monster terrifies them. It crushes frontline efficiency. And it wasn't just humans. The horses reared and whinnied in fear. Jupiter's horse did the same. Confused, she tried to steady it, but the animal bucked violently. Jupiter was thrown to the ground. An undead creature locked its gaze onto her. She cursed under her breath as Ash silently did the same. The undead charged. Her squad rushed forward as a knight placed himself between her and the enemy. The commander shouted, "Defensive formation, protect the mage." Ash clenched his teeth. "Jupiter, the core of our military strength in Stage 1, and the hero party, they're in danger." Lucas spun toward him. "Your Highness, we need to turn the cannon fire net to support Jupiter's party." "No," Ash snapped instantly. "The fire net must stay as it is. If the kill zone collapses, even more monsters will escape." Above them, the presence of the boss monster continued to sow chaos. Soldiers atop the wall lost focus. Cannon and ballista fire weakened. What had once been a flawless firing net quickly filled with gaps. Ash waved his hand sharply. "Restore the fire net, the soldiers have lost their composure." He bit down hard. "I'm sorry, Jupiter." Her eyes snapped open. She grabbed her head, wincing as blood smeared across her palm. "Oh, for Lord's sake, am I really at the age where this kind of thing happens?" A mercenary rushed to her side. "Dame Jupiter, you're awake. We need your help." Dame Jupiter, undead surrounded the squad on all sides. Jupiter pushed herself up slightly, hand still pressed to her head. "What a shitty situation. Looks like this isn't the time to be lying around." "The rescue team is on the way," the mercenary shouted. "We just need to hold out until then." At that moment, a living suit of armor appeared behind them. The man spun around instantly and struck with all his strength. The undead staggered, leaning heavily on one leg before slowly bowing its head. The mercenary staggered back and shouted, "It endured that hit." Jupiter's eyes widened. "You're back, rookie, you're back," she yelled, but it was already too late. The mercenary's body froze as he sensed something behind him. His gaze slowly shifted, confusion creeping into his face. "I was certain all the bastards in this area were dead." A single living suit of armor had slipped through, it struck. More enemies surged forward in the next instant, and then only his arm remained where he once stood. Jupiter ground her teeth. "You fucking frying pieces of shit." She raised her hand at once. Lightning crackled between her fingers, but her expression twisted. "Shit, my magic control is..." Before she could finish, a girl nearby was grabbed and brutally killed. A boy stared at her corpse, despair filling his eyes. He dropped his shield and turned to run. The living armor swung its spear, then hurled it. The projectile pierced the boy cleanly. Jupiter turned her head, staring at the scene in silence. The fragile defense line maintained by only a handful of people collapsed in an instant. She could smell them now, right in front of her: rusty armor, rotten water, death. Dark energy seeped from the living armors as lightning once again formed in Jupiter's hand. Her eyes narrowed. "You should have stayed at the bottom of the lake. Did this good old grandma earning her salary comfortably really irritate you that much?" She unleashed the spell. A thunderbolt struck, obliterating the enemy. When the light faded, only shattered remains were left behind. Jupiter exhaled slowly. "That bolt wasn't even half my usual output." Her lips trembled. "Looks like I'm done for." She turned sharply. "You run out of here. At least one of us has to survive," she shouted. "I'll buy time with my magic, so while I do that, get the hell out of here, kid." The mercenary shook his head. "We're better off staying until the rescue team arrives," he argued. "Granny, you're a magician. Mercenary rules of survival. Number 2, always stick with your allied magician." He gripped his weapon and looked forward. "Running without a horse is suicide. I've got better odds supporting you." Jupiter was left speechless. The young man charged in, pushing the living armors back. Ash observed from afar. The mercenary didn't try to kill them. He forced them away with his spear, slashing just enough to maintain distance. "I'll hold them off somehow," the mercenary shouted. "Prepare your next spell." Demian watched in terror. Though Demian continued to provide covering fire from the wall, it wasn't enough. The monsters kept advancing. When Jupiter finally gathered enough mana to summon another lightning strike, the spears pierced through the mercenary's body. At that instant, Jupiter snapped. A massive bolt of lightning tore down from the sky, annihilating everything in its path. Then she froze. If I had gathered mana just a few seconds faster, could he have been saved? She clenched her fists. "I'm too old." The mercenary coughed violently, blood spilling from his lips. Jupiter narrowed her eyes and asked quietly, "What's rule number 1 in mercenary survival?" The young man looked away, then lowered his head. "Don't take missions that pay a strangely large sum." His eyes rolled back. The sky darkened completely. Jupiter stared at the enemies ahead. "Your survival rules are all wrong, kid," she muttered. "You won't make it big with rules like those. If you want money, if you want fame, take the dangerous jobs that pay a fortune, and take as many magicians as you can." Blood trickled down her hand. "Because they'll take all the credit," she smiled faintly. "And if you really wanted to live, you never should have become a mercenary." Her hand trembled as she raised it. "Do I not even have enough magic left to light a cigar?" Enemies closed in. "Ah," she sighed. "I thought this job was finally going my way, a nice high-income contract." She smiled. "So this is how it ends." Then a rider burst through from behind. In a flash, Lucas cut down every enemy before her. Jupiter stared in disbelief. Moments earlier, atop the fortress wall, Ash had stretched out his hand and shouted, "Restore the kill zone. The soldiers have lost their minds." He clenched his teeth. "I'm sorry, Jupiter, just hold on a little longer." He raised his voice again. "Don't get intimidated just because of the monster's size." A soldier screamed, "Arg, I'm not scared." "Whoa, that's terrifying." "What are you doing all of a sudden?" Ash blinked. A skill notification appeared. Wait, could it be? He realized. Not only does it block mental debuffs, it stabilizes shaken minds too. He turned sharply. "Lucas. This will calm the soldiers and restore the kill zone. You're in charge of the rescue." He pointed forward. "Open the gates, walk into the Valley of Death and bring our comrade back." Then he smiled firmly. "I'm trusting you, Lucas." Lucas met his gaze and shouted, "I'll return as soon as possible." No hesitation. The next moment he was beyond the gates. "Get your senses back, you dumbasses," someone roared from the wall. Lucas raised his weapon and cut through the enemies with overwhelming force. Jupiter stared. "Huh, hold on tight," Lucas said calmly. He pulled her up, secured her, and kicked the stirrups. They charged forward. The undead screamed and hurled spears after them. Lucas shattered every projectile with a single swing. Jupiter glanced at her savior and smirked. "Say, any interest in meeting my granddaughters, fine young ladies?" Lucas didn't even blink. "If you've got time for jokes," he replied coolly, "use it to recover your magic. There are still plenty of monsters left." Jupiter smiled faintly. To his owner, he was gentle, but when the prince wasn't around, he was ice cold. Still, she spoke calmly. "In any case, thank you for saving me." The horse kept running as Lucas replied, "No thanks are needed. I was only carrying out His Highness's orders. I apologize for arriving so late." His eyes never left the battlefield. The undead across the field suddenly froze. Jupiter glanced sideways. "We can talk about regrets after we kill all those monsters," she said quietly. "It's been a while since this little lady's been this angry." They reached the gates. Explosions thundered through the kill zone. Thanks to indomitable commander, the firing net was restored just in time, and Jupiter returned safely. Ash looked down from the wall, his expression dark. "I relied too much on my game experience." In the game, he had to manage morale too. Fear and confusion existed there as well. But reality was different. Responses were far more detailed, far more unpredictable. I didn't even consider that the horses would panic. This was reality, and that meant every variable had to be accounted for. At that moment, the wooden fortifications ignited. Flames spread rapidly from the artillery fire. The kill zone began to crumble as enemies flooded through the gaps. The structure burned away piece by piece, and Ash watched as the undead army pushed forward. They were heading straight for the castle. Ash clenched his teeth. "Looks like we'll have to fight along the fortress walls. I wanted to finish this with artillery, but that's no longer an option." A system notification appeared. Spectre Knight. One living armor assaulter, 277. Ash exhaled sharply. "At least we've taken down a lot of them. This is still doable." Lucas appeared moments later. "Your Highness. I have rescued Dame Jupiter." He hesitated before using her title. Despite his clear disapproval of her dishonorable discharge, he still showed her proper respect. Ash turned toward her. "Jupiter. I'm glad you made it back alive." She lowered her head. "My sincerest apologies, Your Highness. This old woman made a grave mistake. Because of me, those young rookies died for nothing. It's unforgivable." Ash met her gaze. "No one could have predicted a monster appearing in the sky or the horses panicking. This wasn't your fault." Jupiter stared at her trembling hand. "No, it was my failure. With my experience, I should have handled it. I'll be the one to take that monster's head." Recover first, Ash replied firmly. Your strength will be needed very soon. The living armors advanced again. Cannons fired. Ash spun around. The kill zone has lost its purpose. The soldiers froze. Demian turned, confused, placing a hand on his shoulder. Take a break. But there are still so many. You've got a bigger target coming, Ash said calmly. Rest and recover, all right. At last the enemies reached the fortress walls. When they failed to break through, Ash turned sharply. Prepare for hand-to-hand combat. The soldiers drew their maces and formed ranks. Yes, sir. Ash's eyes burned. This isn't a war fought with magic anymore. It's raw physical force. A massive legion stood behind him as the undead climbed relentlessly. Armor scraped against stone. Starting now, the real war begins. Hold, Ash commanded. Stand by, do not fire. The living armor reached the edge. Ash shouted. When we reinforced the walls, I had debris stockpiled above them. Stone, steel, everything left over. Drop it now. The soldiers tipped the barrels. Debris rained down. Living armors shattered on impact, but not all stayed down. Even after that, they're still climbing, Ash muttered. Use your spears, came the next order. Push them down. Ash opened the system window. Party synergy activated. Ash and Demian all party magic and attacks increased by 20%. Ash grinned. That's insane, beautiful, but there was no time to celebrate. A soldier's spear snapped. An undead hand grasped the wall. The living armor hauled itself up, glaring at the humans. They're coming over, Ash's mind raced. We have to stop them here, take their blows head on, hold them, slash them down, just stand and endure. This isn't about choice. If we want to live, everyone has to grow stronger, fight, break through, win. Activate the next artifact, Ash ordered. Lily responded instantly. Haste artifact activated. Movement speed and attack speed increased by 5%, duration 5 minutes. A surge of power swept through the soldiers. Ash checked his status. Equipped traits 3 out of 3. Leader, Ash attack totem, Ash defense totem. Everything I have will carry us through this melee. The soldiers roared as they pushed back against the monsters. The protagonist watched nervously. For now, they were holding their ground. Don't stop, it's up to you now, everyone, he shouted. The soldiers clashed with the monsters, pouring everything they had into the fight. Lucas was still holding the line as well, cutting down multiple enemies with a single swing. Ash stared at him in surprise. A stacking type skill, the more enemies he kills, the stronger he becomes. Lucas alone had cleared nearly half the wall. However, he can't handle all of them. Ash scanned the battlefield. We're losing ground, he shouted. If you're injured, pull back, switch positions, a soldier cried out as he was wounded. Another grabbed him and dragged him away. The living armors pressed forward relentlessly. Unlike them, we're losing more and more soldiers to injuries, Ash realized. Demian turned to him urgently. Your Highness, I should return to the front line. Ash shook his head slightly. He needs to conserve his strength for the boss. Same with Jupiter. There has to be a way to reduce casualties and wipe out the remaining enemies. Then a blinding flash lit up the sky. Ash's eyes widened. A massive beam of fire descended from above. Lily, standing beside him, unleashed a roaring torrent of flames. She stretched her arms forward confidently, fire pouring out like a fountain. Ash stared at her in disbelief. You can use magic, you're a mage, she turned, completely serious. I've always been a mage. Sure, great job, Lily, I'll promote you later. Her expression immediately darkened. No, please let me retire, she staggered slightly. I can't handle this much mana drain from fire magic. Fine, I'll give you a huge bonus, Ash shouted. Just one more time, I said I want to retire. You can do it once more. I'm out of mana, you're doing it. He turned forward with a wicked grin. Party synergy 20%, attack totem 5%, that's a total 25% boost to fire magic. His eyes gleamed. The efficiency is insane, let's go my flamethrower. One more time, at least treat me like a human being, Lily screamed as she unleashed the spell again. The soldiers surged forward, blocking the living armors with their bodies. Lucas cut them down with his blade, and Lily burned everything in her path. Silence fell. The soldiers stared ahead in disbelief. Then, it's over, we did it. We ended it. Cheers erupted across the wall. But Ash raised his hand sharply. It's not over yet. There's still one left. The armor fragments began to rise. All the enemy remains lifted into the air. The Phantom Knight gathered them around himself. Armor assembled piece by piece, a sword formed in his grasp. One eye flared with an eerie glow. In the next instant, he was fully armed. The Spectre Knight descended. He slammed into the ground. Debris exploded outward as soldiers leapt back. Ash clutched his head. For fuck's sake, how does this make sense? There's no way that thing is a stage 1 boss. The Phantom Knight straightened. His entire body ignited in red light. Ash's hands trembled, then he steadied himself. Don't panic, it's only the stage 1 boss, a level 25 monster. Don't hold back, pour everything into it. Before it reaches the wall, hurry, fire, he shouted. The cannons roared. The Spectre Knight walked forward, completely engulfed in artillery fire. Disgustingly tough gunshots echoed endlessly, yet the monster didn't stop. Its pace only quickened. The projectiles slammed directly into the monster's chest. Flames engulfed its entire front, yet even under the relentless bombardment, the Spectre Knight continued to advance. Lily turned in horror as her name was called. Ash looked straight at her. Activate the third artifact, R-rank artifact Mana Amplifier. It increases the magic power of one targeted unit by 100%. Jupiter's magic power has been amplified. Jupiter's body began to shine. She closed her eyes, then smirked. It's like I'm back in my prime. Ash pointed straight at the monster. Jupiter, please go all out. Focus everything on his chest plate. She stepped forward. I'm not taking responsibility if anyone gets electrocuted, Thunder roared. Lightning tore through the sky, a blinding flash erupted. The Spectre Knight was swallowed in electricity. Cracks spread across his chest plate. It's the spirit core. Ash spun around instantly. Demian. One more shot, the boy rushed to the ballista, activating his sniper sight as the ropes screamed under tension. The bolt fired, it struck dead center, the core cracked then shattered. Was that not enough? Ash muttered. But the knight lifted his head, its eye burned brighter than ever. Ash froze. The monster tightened its grip on the sword. If that thing swings, the wall will shatter. Jupiter again? Ash shouted. She scoffed, swinging a weapon in a thunderstorm. You're begging to get electrocuted, idiot. Lightning wrapped around the sword. The Spectre Knight glowed violently, then a massive bolt struck. The monster was fully charged, but the sword still moved. Everyone run, Ash screamed. Get out of the blade's path. The sword's shadow fell over the wall. Lucas lunged, grabbing Ash. Move, the blade struck. The wall shook violently. Soldiers scattered as dust and debris filled the air. Are you all right, Your Highness? Ash pushed himself up. I'm fine. The soldiers slowly looked back. The sword was lodged in the wall. The Spectre Knight lowered its head, then it collapsed, armor shattered apart. The boss of Stage 1 was finally defeated. Souls poured out from the remains, rushing toward the wall. Ash narrowed his eyes. Its final struggle, AoE crowd control, fear and confusion. If this hits, but this is human territory now, he declared. Begone, indomitable commander activated. A golden wave burst outward, the souls slowed, then dissolved into light. Only golden dust remained. The soldiers stared in disbelief. What happened to that monster? His Highness stopped it. They stepped toward the edge of the wall. The clouds parted, sunlight poured down, the flag fluttered in the wind. Ash raised his hand. We will continue to win, and we will continue to survive. The sword still jutted from the wall, but they were alive. Lucas smiled. Let's defeat the monsters, let us live on. Ash froze briefly, hand still raised. The terror of battle had given way to triumph, and somehow it felt good. The sun shone brightly over the wall. A notification appeared. Stage 1 clear, rewards have been sent. Stage MVP Jupiter.